Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979, in Baytown, Texas. Her childhood was challenging, as her parents, Pamela Sue Surratt and Anthony Paul Tony Walters, struggled with addiction, leading to an unstable home life. Tragically, she lost both parents to apparent overdoses by the age of 11. After their deaths, she was raised by her grandmother and later by her uncle, Jeff Walters. Despite these hardships, she was known for her vibrant smile, striking blue eyes, and uplifting personality. Crystal pursued a career as a flight attendant, where her adventurous spirit thrived as she traveled across the country. During her journey, she met Stephen Wayne McDowell, who was 7 years older than she. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his large stature, Stephen won Crystal's heart. They married in April 2007 after dating for a while. He had a daughter from a previous marriage and worked as a shipping manager, but he struggled to maintain stable employment, which forced Crystal to become the primary breadwinner. While she excelled in her career, Stephen's professional instability created tension in their relationship, especially concerning her frequent travels. As jealousy grew, Stephen began to suspect Crystal of having affairs during her flights, despite the lack of evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal valued her family and sought stability, given her difficult past. In 2016, after 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she decided to leave and join her family's real estate business. This shift allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of stability. Her uncle Jeff was proud to welcome her into the third generation of their real estate legacy. Crystal quickly excelled in her new role, being recognized for her charm, professionalism, and dedication. However, she confided in close friends that this career change also served a strategic purpose, as she believed it would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, Crystal's marriage had deteriorated significantly, prompting her to file for divorce due to years of emotional distress. On March 20th, she called 911, claiming Stephen had threatened her and their children. The authorities responded but treated the case as a precaution rather than a criminal incident. At that time, there were no custody arrangements, allowing Stephen to legally be with his children. Although officers attempted to contact him, they were unsuccessful. A few days later, Stephen returned the children, and Crystal chose not to press charges, opting instead to focus on reducing tension for the sake of their kids. Crystal's friends commented that she tried her best to keep the divorce amicable, putting the happiness of her children first. Stephen's adult daughter was troubled by this incident and questioned her father about his behavior. He expressed anger over alleged affairs that Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that those close to her dismissed as false. Many who knew them recognized that their relationship had been toxic for years, and even Stephen's daughter acknowledged that, while she and Crystal had a great relationship, the marriage had always been unstable. Although their divorce was finalized in June 2017 and appeared to be friendly, especially since Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while renovating her own, issues beneath the surface remained unresolved. Crystal often asked her family not to mention their plans or outings to Stephen, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Even simple activities, like spending time with a friend, could set him off. Despite being legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept the situation. His social media activity displayed a concerning trend. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile picture to a tombstone, then to an image of Santa Muerte, and later reverted to a photo of himself with Crystal. His post suggested an image of a happy family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to emotionally support Stephen, checking in on him regularly. He claimed to be adjusting to the separation and focusing on his life, but his behavior suggested otherwise. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted pictures of himself bringing Crystal coffee in bed, as if their relationship was still going strong. In an effort to maintain a harmonious co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a trip with Stephen and the kids, but their intimacy only blurred the lines further. Then, in August 2017, things shifted. Crystal, now 37, met Paul Hargrave, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charming, ambitious, and shared Crystal's passion for travel and adventure. Their relationship developed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, Crystal felt truly happy. Although she wanted to tell her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it a secret until she found the right time to inform Stephen, still fearful of his reaction. However, that fear didn't stop her from publicly sharing her happiness. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never felt so joyful and that her heart was filled with a happiness she never thought possible. Just 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey approached. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and fulfill her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had collected clean water for the kids and informed him that she was heading to his house to take shelter with them. She intended to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras recorded the last known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels, holding her phone, as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's Uncle Jeff became worried. They were close, working together in real estate and communicating frequently. He tried calling her several times to let her know that a scheduled showing had been canceled because of the storm. When she didn't answer, Jeff contacted Stephen, who sent a suspicious text, allegedly from Crystal's phone, at 9:30 a.m., stating that she planned to pick up the kids and go to Dallas. Jeff was immediately suspicious. Crystal never changed her plans without informing him, and her phone was essential for her work. Things didn't add up, and fearing something was wrong, he reported her missing to the police before noon on August 26th. As floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and 2 family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house in over a week, but his daughter told Jeff that she had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home. Inside, authorities discovered Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, along with her purse and handbag, clear evidence that she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was evident that Stephen was involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, at the time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated the area, and many law enforcement officers and first responders were focused on rescue efforts in flooded neighborhoods. Consequently, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Desperate for answers, Jeff decided to reach out to the media to raise awareness and search for clues. However, his efforts were overshadowed by the constant news coverage of the storm. After days of no progress, Jeff hired a private investigator, feeling frustrated with the silence of local authorities. This decision sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney opposed the involvement of an outside investigator in Crystal's case, arguing that crucial evidence could be compromised. This resulted in increased tensions between Crystal's family, law enforcement, and the local media in Houston. Unwilling to give up, Jeff teamed up with Crystal's new boyfriend, Paul, to offer a $15,000 reward for credible information. They launched a social media campaign that ultimately attracted public attention. However, the investigators began to suspect not only Stephen but also Jeff and Paul. Although Jeff was tirelessly searching for Crystal, law enforcement remained skeptical of him. Rumors about his personal life, including his same-sex relationships, spread throughout the town of Bedtime, leading some to believe that these biases influenced how authorities perceived his involvement. The local police commander dismissed Jeff's concerns during a national broadcast, labeling him as overly emotional and a hindrance to the investigation. Paul was also scrutinized. After taking a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his credibility came into question. Things worsened when he sent surveillance footage from his home to news outlets instead of directly giving it to the police. Paul defended his actions by stating that he initially tried to share the videos with the sheriff's office but felt ignored, prompting him to go public to clear his name. Then there was Stephen. Even though he displayed manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal left him, investigators perceived him as polite, helpful, and cooperative. However, family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and controlling. Authorities did not see Stephen as a potential threat or a vengeful ex-husband. This perspective began to shift on Tuesday, August 29th, as floodwaters receded. A family friend discovered Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a dilapidated motel, an area highlighted during their online campaign. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators suspect the car was staged as a burglary, but flooding has made it difficult to access. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she disappeared. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He did not purchase gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car was still there. Even more unsettling, other footage captured a hooded figure resembling Stephen riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The evidence was accumulating, and for the first time, attention turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a potential suspect in a case that had gone too long without resolution. The investigation took a significant turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart, situated just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was discovered, showed a man who looked like Stephen buying a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid with cash, and the timing matched the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this troubling evidence, he denied being involved in Crystal's disappearance. As authorities indicated they lacked direct evidence, they allowed him to go home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Her uncle, Jeff, pointed out to the district attorney that Crystal had previously reported that Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she left him. Jeff was convinced of Stephen's emotional and mental instability. It wasn't until September 8th, nearly 2 weeks after Crystal vanished, that the district attorney intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. However, Stephen controlled the situation. He requested to return home for one last night to organize things and promised to confess the next day. Jeff and other family members were angry, fearing that this unsupervised time might allow Stephen to harm himself and evade justice. On September 9, 2017, Stephen returned to the police station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal had told him she would be taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on a family trip instead of him. Due to this, he became enraged. While their children slept upstairs, he attacked Crystal from behind and strangled her to death. Afterward, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove before sunrise to a wooded area near his home, where he disposed of her remains. Even after confessing, he still refused to reveal the location of the body unless the prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Due to the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities worried that they wouldn't find the body without his assistance, so they accepted his terms. Later that day, Stephen guided authorities to a remote, overgrown area, and Crystal's remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, who was 44 at the time, was charged with first-degree murder, and bail was set at $500,000, which he could not afford. In addition to the issues of jealousy and anger, the case also highlights a more terrifying truth. Without Crystal, Stephen would have no financial resources to support himself and his children. The pursuit of justice moved slowly, as the trial did not commence until June 2019. During this time, Stephen displayed no remorse in court. He tried to create the impression that he was a man suffering from pain, claiming he acted out of a sudden fit of passion, a defense strategy in Texas that could significantly lessen his punishment if accepted. He also suggested that Crystal's death was the result of a consensual encounter that went awry. However, the prosecution effectively countered this narrative, highlighting the ongoing emotional abuse and control he had imposed during their relationship. Stephen's defense team attempted to tarnish Crystal's reputation by presenting unverified text messages and claims that she had been unfaithful. However, her friends and family stood up for her, describing her as a vibrant and loving person dedicated to her children. They also shared experiences of the years of dysfunction and manipulation she endured. One of the most heart-wrenching moments during the trial occurred when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand. She recounted a painful revelation in December 2017, when Stephen and Crystal's 5-year-old daughter shared a secret. The girl recalled the morning her mother went missing. She had heard her parents arguing. After hearing the commotion, she walked from the bathroom into the bedroom, where she witnessed her father pushing her mother onto the bed and covering her mouth and nose with his hand. She stood at the edge of the bed and watched until her mother stopped moving. Afterwards, her father took her upstairs and told her not to speak about what she had seen. Mandy quickly reported the incident to the authorities, and she was placed in a trauma counseling program, but the emotional scars continued to haunt her. Another important witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. Melissa testified about helping Crystal move out of her home when her conflicts with Stephen escalated. Melissa later supported her move back home after Stephen threatened to harm himself if she did not return. Cherry recounted that even after the divorce, he continued to emotionally manipulate Crystal, including starving himself to make her feel responsible for his health. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's house, where they found him looking anxious, shaking, and in tears. The daughter of Crystal and Stephen claimed that she had seen her mother the day before and pointed to a black dress in the closet in a concerning manner, saying that evil spirits had taken her away. This disturbing scene prompted Melissa and Jeff to call the police from outside the house, urgently requesting that they remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their requests were ignored. Melissa also shared her account of a family cruise that Stephen had suggested as a way to say goodbye peacefully. Although Crystal hesitantly agreed, she made it clear that there would be no threats, manipulation, or harm involved. However, as the trip approached, an argument over finances led her to cancel, realizing that Stephen was not genuinely trying to say goodbye but was instead attempting to win her back. The most troubling testimony came from an inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen and claimed that Stephen confessed in detail to killing Crystal. According to the inmate, the motive was a text message from another man. He described how Stephen admitted to using zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after her death, information only known to the forensic team. Officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety corroborated parts of Stephen's confession, stating that he claimed Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They had an argument, during which she told him that she had never really loved him. She encouraged him to move on with his life. In a fit of rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial concluded quickly. The jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder in just 3.5 hours. On September 10, 2019, he received a sentence of 50 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 25 years before being eligible for parole, potentially allowing for his release in 2042. Crystal's family was heartbroken by what they perceived as a light sentence. Her uncle Jeff exclaimed in court that Stephen deserved a harsher punishment, while others expressed frustration, advocating for a life sentence or the death penalty. However, those options were not available due to the agreement Stephen made in exchange for revealing the location of Crystal's body. The family's main concern was not the length of the prison sentence, but rather the emotional impact on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, they faced a devastating loss. Crystal had dedicated her life to them, and now they were left to cope with trauma that many adults would struggle to endure. By 2020, Mandy, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was working to adopt them legally. Some sources indicate that Mandy was Crystal's best friend from childhood, while others suggest they may have had a romantic relationship at one time. Regardless of their history, Mandy was Crystal's most trusted confidant and was committed to caring for the children. Now that you know the complete story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Please share your opinion in the comments. We are reading all of them. Mariana Jocelyn Baltira Valenzuela was born on November 24, 1998, in the city of Ixtapan de la Sal, located in the state of Mexico. She is the older sibling of 2 children from a modest family. Fate decreed that she had to fight for her life from her first days. She was born much earlier than expected, and doctors seriously feared that the child, with a critically low weight, would not survive, which they informed her parents, Syra and Orlando. Mariana spent the first 2 months of her life in a hospital, in a special ward for premature babies. Her mother prayed day and night for her daughter's health, and her prayers were answered. The girl quickly recovered and gained weight, By the new year of 1999, she was discharged home, allowing her parents to celebrate the holiday with their daughter. Fortunately, Mariana had no external consequences of prematurity. She grew up slim and beautiful, but her health was very poor from a very early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, a second child appeared in the family, a boy. Mariana adored her younger brother and helped her parents take care of him. From the earliest age, they were very close and practically inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to regularly take special medications to minimize the likelihood of seizures. The prescribed drugs and constant monitoring by specialists yielded good results, allowing her to lead a relatively ordinary life, not too different from her peers. Moreover, she treated her health responsibly, following the regimen and taking the necessary medications. Mariana studied well at school, drew beautifully, and loved music. She was a very kind, open, and sincere girl. Everyone who knew her personally spoke positively about her. However, she was also modest and shy, especially in her teenage years. She had only a couple of best friends, did not go on dates, did not attend parties, and hardly interacted with boys. Mariana preferred to spend time at home with her family, with whom she had very close and warm relationships. The fragile and petite girl looked much younger than her age. At 16, she seemed no older than 13. Kind-hearted and sympathetic, Mariana always tried to help homeless animals, which she fed, treated, looked after, and then handed over to safe hands. As a high school student, she finally decided to become a veterinarian and provide professional assistance to those in need. Her parents often said that their daughter was too naive and trusting. She didn't perceive evil or danger from other people, as she herself brought only light and kindness into the world. Therefore, her father and mother were always worried that Mariana could be offended or harmed by someone taking advantage of her innocence. The area where the Baltira family lived was relatively calm. Almost everyone who lived there knew each other by sight. However, along their street, there were a large number of shops where many migrant workers worked unofficially. Some of them lived right in the shops, as most did not have their own housing, and some could not even afford to rent a room. Naturally, among these workers were individuals with extensive criminal histories. But, as long as they performed their duties properly, the shop owners usually had no complaints about them. About 50 meters from the Baltira family home was a butcher shop. The shop owner hired 4 workers, 2 locals who sold goods, 2 immigrants unloading cargo, butchered carcasses, and cleaned the store. The shop owner allowed the workers to stay on the second floor of the shop, which was an attic. As Mariana grew older, her parents began to periodically ask her to go shopping for the family, including to the aforementioned butcher shop. There she repeatedly encountered one Cruz Quintero Martinez, a worker of the landlord who lived on the second floor. She felt fear of this man just by his presence. She repeatedly told her friends and her parents that there was something sinister in his gaze that made her blood run cold. At the same time, there was nothing specific she could blame on this man, since he did not approach her or attempt to contact her in any way, but merely looked at her. So her parents decided not to let their daughter go to this store anymore and went shopping for the necessities themselves. At some point, Juan Martinez committed a minor theft, resulting in the store owner's decision to fire him. After that incident, they did not hear from him for about a year. However, in early summer 2017, he returned to his former workplace, tearfully begged his former employer to rehire him, assuring him that he would work diligently. Remarkably, he was rehired and moved back into the second floor of the store. Cyrus' niece was visiting the Baltiras while Mariana and her younger brother were on summer vacation, with Orlando being the only one at work. Around 9 a.m., Syra asked her daughter to go to the local supermarket to buy breakfast. She believed her daughter was old enough to handle such a task. Moreover, the street was well lit and crowded. In her opinion, nothing bad could happen. She gave her daughter some money and asked Mariana to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. Mariana left the house dressed in an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was located less than a couple of 100 meters from their house, so the round trip to get there, buy the necessary items, and return should not have taken more than half an hour. However, when an hour passed and Mariana still had not returned, her mother grew concerned, especially since Mariana's phone was left at home. With her little niece in her arms, Syra went to look for her daughter. She walked down the street to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen a young girl in glasses. They informed her that a girl fitting her description had bought groceries a quarter of an hour ago and had left the store. Panic began to set in. Syra realized that something terrible had happened. Syra returned home, asked her son to look after his niece, and then went out to the street, where she began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen her daughter. However, it seemed as if the girl had vanished without a trace. Syra immediately reported the incident to the police and called her husband, who rushed home from work to help find their daughter. By the time the police arrived at the scene, dozens of neighbors, as well as relatives and friends of the Baltira family, had already joined the search. They called all of Mariana's acquaintances, combed the streets, and posted printed leaflets with her photographs. Initially, law enforcement officials were not particularly concerned about the situation. They asked the parents whether their daughter could have gone on a date or visited someone. Syra and Orlando insisting that their daughter would never go anywhere without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in her home clothes and with a grocery bag, knowing she was expected back home. There were surveillance cameras installed in the area where Mariana disappeared, but almost none of them were functional. The entire day of searching yielded no results, and not a single trace of the girl was found. As night fell, anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents realized that they would likely never see Mariana alive again. The next day, July 28th, at about 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a nearby relative, who informed them that several police cars had arrived at a butcher's shop. Without hesitation, the Baltira got ready and went to the indicated location. Law enforcement agencies did not allow them inside. But Syra and Orlando had no intention of leaving. Minutes after checking the scene, one of the police officers informed Orlando that the body of a young girl, identified as the missing Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building, lifeless and badly mutilated. Orlando was invited inside to confirm her identity, but Syra was strongly advised against entering, as the crime scene was truly shocking. Orlando could not believe his eyes as he looked at the body lying in a puddle of blood, his daughter. His world collapsed in an instant, and he did not know how to tell his wife, who was waiting outside. Mariana had been repeatedly abused and brutally mutilated. The cause of death was massive blood loss due to a stab wound to the stomach. The perpetrator cut open her abdomen while she was still alive, leaving her to bleed to death. An expert opinion showed that her death occurred on the night of July 27th, just a few hours before the discovery of her body. Therefore, she was alive for almost 24 hours from the time of her disappearance, during which the criminal abused her until he fatally wounded her. The murder weapon, a knife intended for cutting up carcasses, was found on the floor next to her body. The body was discovered by the owner of the store when he arrived for work that morning. According to him, every last Thursday of the month was designated as cleaning day, during which he did not work. On that day, the owner was engaged in organizational matters, meetings with suppliers, and submitting reports to the tax office while his employees cleaned and disinfected the premises. When he arrived in the morning, he immediately noticed blood stains on the floor. Initially thinking that one of his employees living on the second floor had been injured, he was shocked to find bloody men's clothing, a knife, and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. In addition, a large sum of money had gone missing from the cash register, which the criminal had evidently taken upon fleeing. Two men who lived and worked at the store immediately came under suspicion. However, one of them showed up for work an hour later, appearing just as shocked as everyone else. He explained that he had to return home to another city urgently, and his colleague, Juan, said Juan would cover for him and clean the store himself. The police concluded that this man was telling the truth, noting that there were no traces of him at the crime scene, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. By that time, CCTV footage from the supermarket, which Mariana had visited on the last day of her life, was obtained. The footage showed she entering the store, followed by one a few minutes later, the man who worked at the butcher's shop and had instilled genuine fear in Mariana. He stalked his victim like a wild animal hunting prey, following her out of the supermarket without purchasing anything. After that, both of their trails vanished. Reconstructing the sequence of events outside the store proved impossible. Although there were cameras on the street, they were non-functional, and none of the numerous passers-by or street sellers reported anything suspicious. Mariana's parents were convinced that their daughter would never have gone with this man, No matter how he might have lured her, they believed he had forcibly taken her to the store. However, they were left wondering why she did not scream or call for help, and why none of the many passers-by or street vendors noticed anything unusual about the situation. 27-year-old Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez was characterized as withdrawn and uncommunicative. Those who knew him said that he was a violent person with sadistic tendencies, which he displayed towards homeless animals. Previously, he had attracted the attention of the police for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He got a job as a worker in a butcher's shop in early 2015. For a long time, according to the shop owner, there were no questions or complaints about him. Juan did his job conscientiously, but in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was subsequently fired. After losing his job, he returned to his parents' home, where his sick elderly mother and his sister, who took care of her, lived. For almost a year, Juan literally sat on their necks, stealing money, selling things from the house, abusing alcohol, and using illegal substances. In addition, he regularly beat his mother and sister. One day, tired of the constant bullying, his sister threatened to call the police if he did not leave the house. Juan, unwilling to deal with law enforcement again, obediently left. Since he had nowhere else to go, he asked his former employer to rehire him. The owner of the butcher shop agreed, providing him with a place to work and a roof over his head, allowing him to continue living on the second floor. It was mid-June 2017, just a month before the tragedy. Juan did his job conscientiously, but about a week later, he met Mariana, who had come of age and literally drove him crazy. She avoided him and never went to that store for shopping. Nevertheless, Juan began to follow her on the streets, discovering where she was going, what paths she was choosing. The second worker who lived with him also noticed his unhealthy interest in Mariana and even tried to joke about it, not suspecting that Juan would soon commit a crime. After Juan became the only suspect in the brutal abuse and murder of Mariana, all available resources were put into searching for him. Initially, law enforcement agencies went to his house, believing that relatives might help him escape. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and that Juan knew his relatives would immediately hand him over to the police. She was not even surprised by the terrible crime her brother had committed. Moreover, she described how he had abused her elderly mother and even attacked the old woman with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if he was not given money for illegal substances. The search for the killer was a priority for the police because Juan was extremely aggressive, violent, and dangerous to others. The money stolen from the cash register would have lasted him a long time, but no one knew how he would behave next or whether he would commit another crime after killing. Throughout the month, the search continued in the Ecatepec area and surrounding suburbs because the police believed that the criminal could not have gone far. However, time passed, and no trace of Juan was found. Soon, information about the abuse and brutal murder of Mariana reached national news, and police from across the state joined the search for the brutal criminal. Juan Martinez's photo appeared daily on television news, was printed on the front pages of newspapers, and was posted on streets all over the country with the note, "Ruthless Killer at Large." A large cash reward was announced for information about his whereabouts, as well as for assistance in his arrest, which was constantly increasing. But even this did not contribute to any progress in the case. The search for the criminal proved difficult, as he had not maintained contact with any relatives and had no friends. Additionally, Juan did not have social media pages and did not even use a mobile phone, let alone credit cards. After 6 months of unsuccessful search attempts, the reward for any information about him was increased to 500,000 Mexican pesos. Even this, however, did not help. Justice for the murder took over 2 years, finally arriving in August 2019 when her executioner was located and arrested. He was found in another state, almost 1,000 kilometers from the crime scene, when he was accidentally recognized on the street by a vigilant elderly woman. He constantly hid his face behind a hood and sunglasses, seemed suspicious to her, so she decided to report him to the police, not suspecting that he was one of Mexico's most wanted criminals. Juan was arrested right on one of the city streets, and to the surprise of law enforcement agencies, he did not even resist. He obediently held out his hands, allowing them to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after his identity was confirmed, the criminal was taken to the city of Ecatepec, where he had committed his crime. He was placed in custody in one of the city's prisons awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragedy, the killer and abuser was finally sentenced. Juan Martinez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 1 million Mexican pesos in compensation for moral damages to the family of Mariana. Mariana's parents and brother said the arrest of the killer was a huge relief to them, as he would certainly not be able to harm other girls. However, even life imprisonment and a large monetary compensation cannot erase the pain from their hearts, as their beloved daughter and sister will not return. They will have to live with this for the rest of their days. It was the 4th of July, a time for celebration. Raul was unaware that someone was approaching from behind. He held a firework in his hands, ready to ignite it, but before he could do so, a gunshot was fired. The festive noise temporarily masked the sound. When the celebration was over, Raul had vanished. Initially, no one understood what had happened to him. Concern grew among his family when he stopped responding to his phone. Days went by with no trace of him, but as the police began their investigation, they uncovered a dark tale, one filled with jealousy, revenge, and a meticulously executed crime hidden behind the festive fireworks. But why was Raul targeted, and who was responsible? The truth would take weeks to surface. First, let's get to know Lauren Wombles. She was born on March 12, 1997, in Dothan, Alabama. Her mother was a stripper, and little information was available about her father. It was evident that Lauren's parents had a rocky relationship, often filled with arguments. Due to this instability, Lauren was mainly raised by her maternal grandmother and her aunt, Erin, who was just 11 years older than her. This close age difference made Erin feel more like an older sister than an aunt. The two grew up together, sharing everything. With her grandmother's support, they formed a loving and tight-knit family. From a young age, Lauren was distinctive. She had beautiful blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and an infectious charm. Her confidence, intelligence, and laid-back nature made her well-liked among her peers. Family members remember that even as a child, Lauren was aware of her beauty and charisma. She aspired to be a model, dreamed of a glamorous life filled with fame. However, as she entered her teenage years, her demeanor changed. Once easygoing, she became rebellious, often skipping school. Lauren lived by her own rules, convinced that no one could control her. At the age of 16, Lauren had an experience that would significantly impact her life. While walking in Dothan, a man approached her, captivated by her appearance. He introduced himself as an entertainment agent, offered to help her start a modeling career by taking photos and connecting her with opportunities. This excited Lauren, but there was one issue: she was still underage. Despite this, the man seemed unconcerned and gave her his business card, encouraging her to reach out once she turned 18. Eager to share the news, Lauren rushed home to tell her aunt, Erin. Instead of celebrating, Erin expressed her deep worries. She cautioned Lauren not to trust the man, fearing that his intentions might not be genuine. However, Lauren, determined and headstrong, dismissed her aunt's concerns. She planned to call him as soon as she turned 18, and she did. Lauren's 18th birthday was a happy time for her family. They celebrated at the popular restaurant Applebee's, enjoying dinner and karaoke together. Her family had no idea this would be the last time they saw her for a long while. The following day, she disappeared, leaving her family frantic with worry as they searched everywhere for her. Although Lauren had always been a bit rebellious, going missing without any notice was very unusual for her. Panic intensified until they received a calm text from her. In the message, she explained that she was flying to Las Vegas that very day with an agent she had met 2 years earlier. She had made her decision. She was entering the adult film industry. In 2015, the adult film industry was thriving, generating billions of dollars each year. To meet the increasing demand, producers were always on the lookout for new talent. For newcomers, earnings varied from $200 to $1,500 per shoot. Coming from a financially struggling background, Lauren found the idea of earning a living based on her looks too appealing to ignore. Upon her arrival in Las Vegas, she realized she needed a memorable and impactful stage name. Inspired by the elegance of gold, She chose Aubrey Gold as a tribute to her mother. Her agency quickly transformed her appearance by fixing her teeth, styling her hair, smoothing out minor scars on her face. She received designer outfits, luxurious shoes, and flashy accessories. Now ready and polished, she dove wholeheartedly into the industry, filming 32 videos, collaborating with some of the biggest studios within just 6 months. The pressures of the adult film industry were overwhelming, and many performers used substances to escape the reality of their work. Aubrey Gold was one of them. She began using marijuana, but after 2 years, it no longer provided the relief she needed. She then turned to alcohol and harder banned substances. At first, her behavior didn't raise concerns, but as her addiction escalated, production studios started to notice. She began arriving late to shoots, frequently disappearing to use banned substances, sometimes showed up so intoxicated that she could barely function. As a result, productions were delayed, and some of her footage became unusable, leading every major studio to blacklist her. In 2017, her agency sued her for breaching her contract, which resulted in the loss of all her royalties. She would not earn anything from the films she had already made, and her agents retained all rights to distribute them. With her career in ruins, Lauren decided to pay to end her contract and left the industry with nothing. Feeling lost and without options, she took on her former name, Lauren Wombles. With no place to turn, she returned to her grandmother's and aunt's home in Alabama. Despite her struggles, they welcomed her back with open arms, committed to helping her rebuild her life. Lauren began working as a waitress at a local restaurant, where she met a young man her age who was described by her family as kind and caring. Although his identity is unknown, by the time Lauren turned 20, she was pregnant with his child. They was excited about their future and embraced the pregnancy with joy. For Lauren, becoming a mother motivated her to change her life. She grew closer to her family, continued her job, and, most importantly, she completely stopped using banned substance. After a healthy pregnancy, she gave birth to a baby girl. Initially, life seemed to be improving. Her past in the adult film industry felt far away. However, her old enemy, addiction, surfaced again. Her relapse worried many, especially her boyfriend's mother, who believed Lauren was unfit to raise a child in her current state. She reported Lauren to Child Protective Services, which led to the permanent loss of custody. This devastated Lauren. Instead of trying to improve her situation, she fell deeper into addiction, believing she had failed. Banned substance became her only way to cope. Her story wasn't finished yet. In a small town like Dothan, everyone was aware of each other's business. Just as people knew Lauren, they were also familiar with William Shane Parker. He had a reputation as a dangerous criminal, and locals warned against getting involved with him. Although he claimed to have served in the military, he returned home to a life of theft and murder for hire. By late 2019, she got her chance in an unexpected place, the Dothan County Jail. Lauren had been arrested for a minor offense and sentenced to 45 days in jail, while Shane was incarcerated for more serious charges. Lauren became fascinated by the prospect of meeting him, drawn in by his infamous reputation. While they were both locked up, they began exchanging letters and messages through other inmates. Once Lauren was released, she was committed to waiting for Shane. When he finally got out, they quickly began a tumultuous relationship. Despite her aunt's pleas to leave Shane and her banning him from their home, Lauren remained undeterred. Shane and Lauren spent every day together, using banned substance and committing minor crimes. Soon, they moved to Graceville, just 10 miles from Dothan. There, Shane introduced Lauren to an important figure in his life, Jeremy Odell Peters. Peters, who was 20 years older than them, owned a successful construction company in Florida, but it served as a cover for his true business, banned substance trafficking. As an experienced criminal, Peters had faced multiple arrests for banned substance dealing at both the state and federal levels, but always managed to avoid serious repercussions. Shane became Peters's right-hand man, and Lauren frequently spent her time at Peters's home. Their involvement in crime was no secret, they openly showed it off. Shane boasted about being a contract killer, claiming he could take a life for as little as $5,000. Instead of being alarmed, Lauren suggesting she would join him if the chance presented itself. It was only a matter of time before her words became a reality. In early 2020, Shane arrived at Peters's house with a man named Raul Ambrizgian. Raul had led a nomadic lifestyle, originally from Mexico and raised in Texas. He had a family, a former wife and 3 children, waiting for him at home. He worked in construction, moving around to provide for them. Raul met Shane while they were both incarcerated in Jackson County Jail. Raul was serving time for an expired vehicle registration, while Shane was in jail due to issues with a fake driver's license. In jail, Shane befriended Raul and promised him that his good friend Peters would offer him a job once they were released. Unaware of the trouble that awaited him, Raul accepted the offer and joined their group, oblivious to the danger surrounding him. On July 26, 2020, Raul's situation took a dark turn. After several days without any contact, his family filed a missing person report with the Jackson County authorities. It was Raul's daughter, Rosa Ambriz, who raised the alarm. She was very close to her father, calling him every day without fail. But now, weeks had gone by without a call from him, and he was unreachable on all his phones. Despite being only 21, Raul's daughter was determined to find her father, no matter what it took. Before going to the police, she began her own investigation on Facebook to learn more about the people her father had mentioned. There, she found a photo of him with a blonde woman from Alabama named Lauren Wombles. She soon realized that Lauren was actually the internationally known Aubrey Gold, a former adult film star. This revelation upset her. Why was her father involved with someone like that? Determined to find out more, she tracked down the name of the man her father had referred to as his generous benefactor. Without hesitation, she called Shane. Their conversation was polite. Shane claimed he hadn't seen Raul and that he had left some time ago. He told her Raul had returned to Texas, but she sensed that was a lie. The last time she spoke to her father, he had told her he needed to finish some work in Jackson before he could visit. There was no way he had left so abruptly. Her father called her mother, his ex-wife, the day before he went missing and told her that he was with people he believed to be dangerous and that he needed to get out of the situation, Ambriz said. She approached the authorities in Jackson County, Florida, to report that her last conversation with her father was on July 4th. Raul mentioned he was going to celebrate that night with some friends, whom she believed to be William Shane Parker and Lauren Wombles. Before handing the case over to the police, she shared one more important detail: her father's cherished Mercedes-Benz truck. She gave them the truck's license plate number, suggesting they use it as a starting point for their investigation. A few days later, the police located the vehicle at a repair shop. Upon inspecting the truck, they realized something was wrong. Raul's treasured Mercedes was in very poor condition and had been stripped for parts. They promptly questioned the shop owner who had received the vehicle. The answer came quickly. The names listed on the service record were William Shane Parker and Lauren Wombles. The investigation gained focus as officers located Lauren and Shane for questioning. They were interrogated separately, which visibly troubled Lauren. When asked about their last interaction with Raul, both she and Shane provided suspiciously similar, vague answers, maintaining that they last saw him in early July. Regarding Raul's truck, they explained that he had been having trouble with it and wanted to get rid of it. Shane stated he had offered to buy the truck for a small amount, planning to fix it up as a gift for Lauren. The police were skeptical but had no option but to release them. The case remained stagnant until August 23rd, nearly 2 months after Raul's disappearance. A man named Joseph Bells entered the police station seeking an urgent meeting with the investigators. Joseph had been Jeremy Peters' best friend for 25 years and was familiar with Lauren Wombles, but he never trusted Shane Parker, whom he described as giving off a bad vibe. Joseph claimed to know the location where Raul's body was buried. A few days earlier, Joseph had been drinking with Jeremy, which was nothing unusual. Suddenly, Jeremy stood up and urged him to follow him into the woods. Confused but intrigued, Joseph complied. Jeremy looked him in the eye and ominously said, before pointing to the ground, That's when Joseph realized he was looking at the spot where Raul's body was buried. Jeremy had asked for his help, planning to move the body to a more secluded place the next day. Joseph agreed at that moment, knowing he had to hide his fear. They planned to meet again the next day, but once Joseph got home, panic overwhelmed him. He was scared not only for himself but also for his wife and children. He understood that getting more involved could endanger them all, yet he felt compelled to do the right thing. He was unaware of what had happened between Raul and Jeremy, but he knew he needed to inform the police. With this new information, everything was about to change. The following day, authorities requested that Joseph show them the burial site. On August 25, 2020, a major operation commenced, involving law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, analysts, and cadaver dogs. The dogs quickly alerted to the exact location Joseph had indicated. The site had been deliberately hidden, with several trees and branches cut down for concealment. When the remains were uncovered, they revealed a decomposing body wrapped in a University of Florida blanket, tightly secured with layers of duct tape. The body was partially covered with cut-in-half plastic barrels. The remains were promptly sent to the medical examiner's office. Shortly after, the forensic report that the body was identified as belonging to Raul. The autopsy determined that he had been executed with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, indicating a calculated murder. With sufficient proof, arrest warrants were issued for Jeremy Peters and Lauren Wombles. An arrest warrant for William Shane Parker was unnecessary since he was already in custody on unrelated charges. Authorities also obtained a search warrant for Jeremy's home in hopes of finding more evidence. The officers discovered a large collection of University of Florida memorabilia, including the exact type of blanket Raul had been wrapped in. They also found burnt fabric resembling the material used to cover the body, as well as multiple plastic barrels identical to those found at the burial site. Lauren was quickly found at her Aunt Erin's house in Dothan, Alabama. She was arrested immediately and later extradited to Florida as a suspect in a murder investigation. Initially, she denied any involvement, lied, and tried to deflect blame. However, it became evident that neither Lauren nor her alter ego, Aubrey Gold, were dangerous criminals. They were simply two troubled sides of the same person, and eventually, under pressure, both broke down. Finally, Lauren revealed the truth: Shane Parker was behind the murder. On July 4, 2020, Lauren, Shane, and Jeremy were drinking together when Jeremy expressed his desire for Raul to be killed. He fabricated the belief that Raul was part of a Mexican gang and he saw it as a threat to his business. In reality, Raul was just an ordinary man and a hardworking father with no gang connections. By the time the accusations arose, the decision to target Raul had already been made. That night, Lauren was given a specific task. She was to bring Raul to Jeremy's house by pretending they were celebrating Independence Day. Jeremy would not be there because he understood the risks of being present when things went wrong. Raul, completely unaware of the plan, happily accepted the invitation and arrived in a festive mood. At some point during the gathering, Lauren handed him some fireworks as part of their scheme. Excited, Raul lit the fireworks and gazed at the beautiful display. Suddenly, he was shot in the back of the head by Shane, who had crept up on him. Raul collapsed immediately. Then, to make sure Guillen was dead, he was beaten with a shovel. The next thing she remembered was waking up the next morning to see Shane and Jeremy loading Raul's body into a truck. However, investigators were hesitant to believe Lauren. She had lied numerous times before. To prove her credibility, she told them that the murder weapon had been cut in half and thrown into a storm drain in Dothan. Authorities searched the area, doubtful of her story, but they found the gun exactly where she had indicated. This confirmed that she was telling the truth. With this incriminating evidence, prosecutors built their case against the suspects. William Shane Parker was charged with second-degree murder, while Jeremy Odell Peters, who had planned the murder under false pretenses, was also charged with second-degree murder as a principal offender. Lauren agreed to a plea deal knowing she couldn't avoid the consequences. In exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years, she testified against Shane and Jeremy. Despite her fear of Shane, who had been abusive toward her for years, she found the courage to speak out, and her testimony helped secure the convictions. In October 2021, the court delivered its verdicts. Jeremy Odell Peters was convicted of being an accessory to murder and corpse abuse. He's sentenced to 20 years in prison. William Shane Parker received a life sentence without parole. Lauren Wombles, now 27, is serving her sentence and is scheduled for release in 2031. This outcome was far from what she imagined at 18, when she left home seeking fame in the adult film industry. Unfortunately, she ended up in a cycle of addiction, crime, and violence, must now deal with the repercussions of those choices. The case of Lori Vallow. Chad Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in Provo, Utah, a small town 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a humble family and was a quiet, shy child. In school, Chad was an average student with no standout talents or athletic skills, and he often felt self-conscious about his weight. After graduating from high school, Chad enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, overcoming several challenges to do so. He a bachelor's degree in journalism in 1992. While in college, he married a woman named Tammy. The couple quickly had 5 children, 3 sons, Seth, Mark, and G, and 2 daughters, Emma and Leah. After completing his education, Chad worked as an editor for a local newspaper. To support his family through financial difficulties, he also took on jobs as a night watchman at a church and as a gravedigger at a nearby cemetery. Since Tammy focused on homemaking and raising their children, the family struggled to make ends meet. Chad then decided to use his journalism education to write a religious-themed book. He published his first work in 1999, which was a collection of religious stories and fantasy elements. To his surprise, the book became quite popular and earned him a big income. As a result, Chad quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to pursue writing full-time. About a year and a half later, he released another book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This book was a science work in which he shared his experiences as a gravedigger and explored themes of death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnation. In 2004, Chad established his own publishing company, Spring Creek, to self-publish his writings. His works focused on views about the approaching end of the world and Judgment Day. Over time, some people noted that Chad's religious beliefs seemed to grow more intense. He published numerous fiction and popular science books that included religious themes. Additionally, he began hosting podcasts and creating audio and video sermons to help people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad referred to himself as an apocalyptic writer and claimed to have visions of the future, hear voices from the deceased, and receive unique prophecies. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. Growing up in a large family, she had 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to support their children. From a young age, Lori was especially close to her older brother Alex, who was protective of her. During her school years, Lori was recognized as a true beauty and had many admirers. She was a charismatic blonde with a slender figure and an engaging smile, enjoying the spotlight and embodying a spirited, adventurous personality. In the spring of 1992, 18-year-old Lori married Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started dating during her senior year. However, they soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were unprepared for family life, resulting in their divorce less than a year later. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to William Leah. A year later, they welcomed a son named Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years after his birth. In early 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from her previous marriage, Colby. A year later, they had a daughter named Tylee, but their marriage ended in 2005. After the divorce, an incident occurred when Joseph came to visit the children. Lori's brother, Alex, attacked him, stating in court that he was protecting his sister's honor because Joseph had insulted her. Consequently, Alex was fined and received a short prison sentence. Lori married Charles shortly after divorcing her third husband, Joseph. They got married in February 2006, and Charles is 17 years older than Lori. Despite the age difference, it did not affect their relationship. Charles had been married before and had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from those relationships. Lori and Charles lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons would visit on holidays and weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income for his family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, also known as JJ Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. JJ had autism and needed expensive therapy, which his relatives could afford. Towards the end of 2014, the family Charles decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to Kauai. At that time, Zachary, Nicholas, and Colby were already adults living on their own, so the Charles family moved as a group of 4: Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family Charles moved to a well-known tourist destination and decided to open a beach bar that focused on fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their hard work and Charles's background in business, but the bar quickly failed due to strong competition. During this period, Lori an interest in religious literature, particularly a book series called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She became so fascinated by the writer's Chad ideas that she became almost obsessed, buying all his books and reading them every day. In 2016, the family Charles had to leave Hawaii and move back to the mainland, settling in Arizona. While Charles worked diligently to support the family, his wife, Lori, became more engrossed in her religious beliefs, becoming disconnected from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie went to an event titled Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, which was hosted by Chad in a nearby town. Excited to meet Chad, whom she admired greatly, Lori sat in the front row, completely focused on him, and Chad also noticed her attractive appearance. After the event, the writer Chad and religious speaker decided to personally exchange with his readers, while Lori, as expected, remained behind. She listened intently and asked if she could touch his hand. After she did, Chad looked into her eyes and revealed that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous lives. Lori and Chad exchanged contact information and began talking every day. A few weeks later, while Charles, Lori's husband, was away in Nevada for work, she invited Chad to host a gathering at her home. On that day, around 12 people gathered at the Lori house to discuss God, Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad decided to work together to prepare people for the impending judgment. They started hosting podcasts about this event, delivering sermons, and writing articles. As time went on, Lori became more disconnected from reality in her family, but Charles did not notice this change right away. He believed it was just a temporary obsession that would eventually fade. By the time he recognized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori began to speak about dark spirits and zombies, claiming to her family and friends that she had been chosen by God for a special mission. This mission included the task of defeating the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's efforts to help his wife return to reality were unsuccessful, and she increasingly viewed him as a dark force that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, Charles and Lori's marriage was nearing its end. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori replaced all the locks in their home. When he returned, Charles found himself locked out, noticed that both his car and the family truck were gone, and realized that $35,000 had been withdrawn from his bank account. Charles shouted for his wife and attempted to enter their home. In a chaotic manner, Lori rushed outside, shouting threats and insults. She yelled that his true self was gone and that a demon had taken over his body. Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him and blocking his access to their home and children. He was worried that Lori had threatened to harm him, so he requested a protective order to keep Lori away from him. That evening, Charles's statements were documented as part of standard procedure. He mentioned his wife's intense religious beliefs, her expectation of an imminent apocalypse, and the tendency to categorize people into two groups, either light or demonic beings. Although the officers mocked him while asking questions, they still issued a protective order. The following day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. Charles's lawyer explained that he was worried about the well-being of JJ, who needed special care. He believed that his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance money and care for JJ if anything happened to him. A few months later, Charles made the critical error of rescind the restraining order against Lori. Charles wanted to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. So he started visiting her home. He missed the children and hoped for the family to come back together. On July 11, 2019, when he arrived to see his children, he was shot twice in the chest and died. Lori's brother, Alex, called emergency services to report the shooting and admitted to pulling the trigger. He claimed he acted in self-defense, stating that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots at Charles. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and the children, and their accounts of what happened were mostly similar. The court determined that the incident was an accidental killing that occurred in self-defense. Although Charles had the potential to cause serious harm with a bat due to his history as a former baseball player, Alex's head injury was minor. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their home, complete with music, many guests, and a disco by the pool, right where her husband had been shot and where blood was still visible. She did not organize a funeral or inform anyone about what happened. A week after Charles died, his son, mother, sister, and other family members discovered the incident when they learned that his body had not yet been claimed at the morgue. After Charles's death, a series of mysterious disappearances and deaths occurred. Lori sold their home in Arizona and moved with her children to Rexburg, Idaho, near Chad and Tammy, who lived in the area. Lori's brother, Alex, also moved in with them to the same housing complex. Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend school and was rarely seen outside. This led many neighbors to be unaware of Tylee's existence. At the same time, Lori described her daughter as a dark entity during a phone call with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Tylee, Lori, and Alex visited Yellowstone Park, where were joined by Chad. Although several photographs from this trip feature Tylee, she was never seen alive again after that day. On September 24th, Lori withdrew JJ's records from school, stating he would be homeschooled. Following this, JJ, 7-year-old boy, was also not seen again. Less than a month later, on October 19th, Chad's 49-year-old wife Tammy died unexpectedly. Chad claimed she had a cold and cough. She likely passed away from respiratory failure during her sleep, showing no signs of foul play. Her death was classified as natural. Interestingly, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to confirm the cause of death, a choice that raised no suspicions. After Tammy unexpectedly passed away, Chad received nearly $500,000 from her insurance policy. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori went to Hawaii and got married in a ceremony by the beach. This surprised Chad's children, people who are still grieving the loss of their mothers and found it hard to understand their father's decision. When they returned to Arizona, Chad and Lori lived together and misled others by stating that Lori's children were staying with relatives or claiming she had no children at all. They also rented a small storage unit nearby and moved all the children's belongings there, as if they had never existed in their home. On December 12, 2019, Alex passed away unexpectedly at home. Although it seemed he died from a heart attack, so his death was classified as natural. As time went on, many people began to ask Lori about her children's whereabouts. While she was able to deceive neighbors and friends, it was more challenging to maintain her lies in front of family members. Colby, Lori's eldest son, had limited contact with his mother after he moved away. He made a real effort to contact his younger sister, Tylee. At first, Lori answered the calls using her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee. However, Colby quickly realized that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Charles's family wanted to see JJ. They requested to take him for holidays or weekends, or just wanted to chat with him on the phone, but Lori always refused or came up with strange excuses. Eventually, JJ's grandmother reported him missing to the police. Shortly after, Colby also went to the police to help find his younger sister, Tylee. When police officers visited Lori's home and requested to speak with her children, she falsely claimed they were with relatives. This turned out to be untrue, so the police returned to her house. They gave Lori a week to bring the children to the station, but instead, she and Chad escaped to Hawaii. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on Kauai and brought back to Arizona. A search of her and Chad's home was conducted, but there were no signs of the children or evidence that they had ever been there. Chad, her husband, who had been defending her by claiming she had no children, soon became a suspect himself. On June 9th, police found human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Tylee and her younger brother, JJ. Chad was quickly arrested for hiding evidence and being an accomplice. Authorities then chose to exhume the bodies of Tammy and Alex to determine how they died. In both cases, they discovered traces of chemicals that could cause heart failure, indicating that these individuals did not die of natural causes. The trial of Lori and Chad began in January 2021. They were charged with conspiring to commit serious crimes, committing fraud through grand theft, and engaging in insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles's death were changed from self-defense to premeditated murder. During the trial, witnesses testified that Lori described her children as dark entities and claimed she could save their souls. There were concerns that the deaths of 16 years old, Tylee, and 7 years old, JJ, may have involved ritualistic practices. Notably, Tylee's body was found partially burned, and weeks before that, Chad sent Lori a people review email in which he rated Tylee as a level 2 dark soul. Due to the serious charges against Lori and Chad, there was a possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent, which paused the trial. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained their father's innocence, stating that he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after receiving treatment in a psychiatric facility, Lori was found competent to stand trial and face her charges. In March 2023, the judge decided that Lori Vallow would not receive the death penalty, a ruling that the prosecution is currently trying to appeal. Later, in July 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, on May 30th, 2023, Chad Daybell was convicted of first-degree murder of his first wife, Tammy, and Lori's 2 children, Joshua, JJ, Vallow, and Tylee, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Chad Daybell then was sentenced to death on June 1st, 2024. In January 2024, in northern Chile, a vast and barren desert became the site of a disturbing discovery. Human remains were found buried beneath the sand near the city of Calama, an isolated area where the harsh climate can preserve bodies for a long time. Their thorough examination indicated that the remains had been intentionally hidden. The rocky terrain made digging challenging. Authorities later confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis shows she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Remains identified as those of Javiera Jimenez, who went missing in 2022. Javiera Jimenez grew up in Chile. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility early on. Her parents worked diligently to create a comfortable life for their children and instilled values of determination and independence in them. Javiera learned quickly that to succeed, she would need to rely on her own hard work. From a young age, she was known for her energetic and goal-oriented personality. In school, she excelled in academics, especially in math and science. However, her greatest passion was working with people. She had a natural talent for connecting with others. She was always eager to help and foster relationships. As a teenager, Javiera aspired to become a dentist. After finishing high school, she enrolled in college to study dental care, dreaming of becoming a skilled professional and eventually opening her own practice. Determined to advance her career, she balanced her studies with a part-time job as a hostess at a bar, where she welcomed customers and helped create a friendly atmosphere. This job not only provided her with income but also helped her enhance her communication skills. In addition to her studies and work, Javiera was actively building her presence on social media. She began by sharing small posts about her daily life, which garnered a larger audience over time. She collaborated with local brands to promote clothing, cosmetics, and other products. Her charm and engaging personality quickly made her blog popular. Javiera didn't focus only on work and academics. She prioritized personal development, was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, managed all her living expenses on her own. Her family was proud of her early independence and her ability to overcome challenges. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family, staying close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly, and sharing her future aspirations. A stagnant life was never an option for her. She was constantly striving to progress. Before she vanished, she had ambitious plans. She was getting ready to move into a new home, aiming to advance her social media career and continuing her studies. Javiera met Andres Sutter in 2022 through a group of mutual friends she frequently hung out with. Initially, there were no red flags with Andres. He was charming, self-assured, and good at building relationships. He made a strong first impression, appearing considerate, engaged, and truly interested in her life. Soon after, their talks evolved into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything felt ideal. He was supportive, encouraged her goals, and admired her independence. However, as time passed, red flags began to appear. Javiera noticed that Andres was excessively jealous. He was uncomfortable with her job at the bar, monitored her interactions, and frequently asked where she was, who she was with. His behavior became increasingly intrusive. He would show up unexpectedly, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her phone, questioning every new contact. His jealousy became unreasonable. He particularly disliked it when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if men were present. Soon, other troubling issues emerged. Andres was often unclear about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job but always seemed to have money. When she inquired about his work, he avoided giving direct answers. Over time, Javiera discovered that Andres's name was associated with certain groups involved in illegal activities. Among a small circle of friends, rumors circulated that he might be involved in criminal activities, including theft and the illegal trade of copper. The turning point in Javiera and Andres's relationship occurred when Javiera discovered that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with illegal activities and didn't want to be involved with someone who could put her in harm's way. Eventually, she decided to end their relationship, stating that she couldn't see a future with him. However, Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to pursue her, calling her frequently, showing up uninvited, and trying to persuade her to return to him. He dismissed her rejection, believing that she would eventually change her mind. As Javiera started to avoid him, Andres became even more persistent, threatening her by claiming he knew everything about her and wouldn't allow her to leave. Javiera had no idea that their breakup would have serious consequences. On August 26, 2022, Javiera's day began like any other. She and her mother, Gladys Galagillos, went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and discussed the changes coming in Javiera's life. Javiera is moving out. She was excited about this new chapter. During their conversation, Javiera expressed her ambitions for the future. She discussed her goals of advancing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her education. Her enthusiasm and drive were evident. Her mother felt happy seeing her daughter so excited. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera assisted her mother with household chores, then folded the things into the suitcase. Later that evening, before leaving, Javiera mentioned to her mother that she intended to spend the night at a friend's house. This was not unusual, as she often stayed over with friends. Once she arrived, she and her mother continued to text each other, as they usually did. Everything seemed perfectly normal. However, as midnight approached, a text arrived that changed everything. Andres messaged her, "I found you, dog." This news was monumental for Javiera, as her dog, Lucky, had been missing for a few days, and she had been searching tirelessly. She had even posted on social media, offering a reward for Lucky's safe return, so she immediately reacted to Andres's message. Then she stopped texting her mom. A few hours later, all attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. The next day, Javiera was expected to come home, but she never arrived. Her family started reaching out to her friends, but no one knew her whereabouts. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in distress. They had only two clues: their last conversation with her and a message that later became crucial in the investigation. Javiera's disappearance caused deep concern for her family and friends. However, the one person who seemed unconcerned was Andres. When her mother finally managed to reach him, he responded in a detached manner, showing no signs of worry. When Gladys inquired about her daughter's location, he calmly stated he had no idea and then proceeded to share his version of events. That night, he met with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They drove to several places but couldn't find it. To distract her, he suggested going to Calama, his hometown. Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her because she was moving the next day, so it seemed she might have intended to stay at his place overnight. However, his account became less clear from there. He claimed they had an argument during the trip. Suddenly, Javiera realized that her suitcase was missing. She thought it might have fallen out of the trunk. Distressed, she insisted they go back to look for it. According to Andres' testimony, he left Javiera at the entrance to the city of Calama while he returned to retrieve a suitcase that fell out of the truck they were both traveling in. This version of events was confusing. Javiera was supposedly left alone on a highway at night, far from the city, without a way to get home or call for help. However, Andres made no effort to persuade her to return to the car, nor did he check if she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed something was wrong with his account. When she pressed him for details, Andres began to contradict himself. At first, he said he had dropped her off near Calama, then he changed it to somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't remember the exact spot, which raised further suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her or any of Javiera's friends to inform them that he left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. He said he thought she was just upset and would find her way home. A few hours later, he altered his story again, claiming that he had been in a car accident after leaving Javiera. He said another car had collided with his from behind, and he went to the hospital for a checkup. This, he explained, was why he didn't go back to look for her. Late Saturday night, almost 24 hours after Javiera went missing, her mother received an unexpected and concerning message from an unknown number. It read, "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother. Gladys read the message repeatedly, sensing something was amiss. The tone felt distant and impersonal, which alarmed her, but the errors stood out even more. Javiera was always meticulous with her texts, avoiding shortcuts and spelling mistakes. This message, however, was filled with typos and awkward phrasing that didn't match her style. Gladys tried to call the number, but the call failed. The phone had already been turned off, increasing her anxiety. Worried, she showed the message to Javier's friends, and they all agreed Javier would never write something like this. They recognized her usual texting style and emotional expressions. The content of the message was also suspiciously vague. Where was she? What kind of accident had occurred? Why hadn't she provided more details? Why send a cryptic message from an unknown number instead of calling? Gladys took immediate action and reported the message to the police. They documented it as a potential attempt to mislead the investigation and distract from a possible crime. A task force was quickly assigned to the case. Investigators traced the message to its originating SIM card. The phone carrier confirmed it was linked to a false identity, a common method used when buying anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement tried to locate the phone. They hoped to find its general location, but it had been turned off shortly after the message was sent. The last known signal placed it near Calama, the same area where Andres claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further examination revealed that the phone had only been used once, suggesting the message was pre-planned and aimed at deceiving her family into believing she had left on her own terms. Experts analyzed the content of the message and found that it did not match Javiera's usual writing style. The errors and unusual phrases were clear indicators that it was not written by her. This finding became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting that the message was fabricated and indicating that Javiera did not disappear voluntarily. As a result, investigators began treating the case as a potential crime, with Andres emerging as the primary suspect. However, the investigation progressed slowly due to a lack of concrete evidence. Concerned that each passing day without answers diminished their chances of uncovering the truth, Javiera's family and friends initiated their own investigation. They spoke with people familiar with Andres, examined his background, and searched for any links to criminal activity. Soon, they discovered evidence connecting him to illegal operations. Through shared contacts, they found individuals who claimed Andres had participated in stealing copper from trains and was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metals on the black market. Furthermore, accounts of his aggressive behavior emerged. Those who knew him described him as having a short temper and a tendency to get into conflicts, often involving physical fights, and an inability to tolerate being contradicted. These details increased the family's concerns. If Andres had a history of aggression, he was certainly capable of committing a serious crime, particularly in a moment of rage. Javier's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she expressed worry that he was tracking her, calling her several times a day, and demanding to know her whereabouts. While her loved ones continued to search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres's car. Since he was the last person known to see Javier alive, his truck could contain important evidence. Inside the truck, investigators discovered traces of blood. Initial analysis showed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also found fibers that seemed to match the clothing Javier was wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears: the blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This revelation completely undermined Andres's claim that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his truck voluntarily, why was her blood found inside? And if she had been injured, why didn't he report it? Police obtained GPS data from Andres' vehicle, which revealed that on the night Javier disappeared, he was driving towards Calama. However, instead of taking the main road, he opted for a side road that led into the desert. His car remained in that isolated area for a long time before it continued on its way. This discovery became a significant turning point in the case, leading investigators to suspect that a crime may have taken place there or that evidence was concealed. When Andres learned that the police had received forensic results, he understood that his arrest was imminent. His behavior changed. He ceased communication with everyone, including those he previously trusted. The day before he was scheduled to be questioned by police, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras recorded him exiting the building with a small backpack and getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he left in a hurry and did not return. Authorities quickly issued an arrest warrant for him, but by that point, he was already gone. Further investigation showed that Andres had used false documents to cross the border, making him a fugitive. His name was added to an international criminal database, but he managed to evade capture. For Javier's family, the only option was to continue seeking justice and waiting. They believed strongly that he would eventually slip up again. When he did, they were confident that the law would catch up with him. Law enforcement's initial efforts to catch Andres were unsuccessful. They found his abandoned car on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was missing, indicating he had carefully planned his escape. Phone records revealed that, just hours before disappearing, he had contacted several people already under investigation for criminal activities, suggesting he used these connections to vanish. Eventually, investigators confirmed that Andres had illegally fled Chile into Bolivia. He avoided official crossings by using lesser-known smuggling routes favored by traffickers. After crossing the border, he adopted a new identity. For months, he successfully evaded capture, fully aware that authorities were searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javier's family refused to lose hope. Gladys tirelessly worked to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres appeared on international wanted lists. The family engaged with the media, raised awareness on social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo, hoping that someone would recognize him and notify the authority. The turning point in the investigation came when a reward was offered for information that would lead to Andres's capture. The family pledged a generous sum to anyone who could provide credible information about his location. This approach proved effective, as tips began to emerge. By late 2023, reports indicated that Andres had been seen in a Bolivian city, living a secluded life and avoiding attention while keeping limited contact with locals. Bolivian authorities started monitoring his movements. They learned, through informants, that he was using a false identity, taking odd jobs, and avoiding any official documents that might reveal who he really was. However, he could not remain hidden forever. In January 2024, a local resident reported his exact location to the police. Authorities responded quickly, initiating a targeted operation to capture him. They surrounded the building where Andres was hiding. The operation was quick and efficient. He complied with their commands and was apprehended without resistance. During his arrest, he remained calm, seemingly resigned to his situation. This time, there was no way to escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. After confirming his arrest, Bolivian authorities began the process of extraditing Andres back to Chile. Within days, he was returned to face trial, allowing Javier's family to see the person responsible for their daughter's death held accountable. However, this was just the start of a long battle for them, as they were determined to push for the harshest possible sentence. Once in Chile, Andres was placed in a detention facility, marking a new phase in the investigation. With the main suspect in custody, authorities had a chance to uncover the answers they had sought for over a year and a half. Initially, he refused to cooperate, denying any involvement in Javier's disappearance. However, investigators were ready, armed with evidence linking him to the crime. As the pressure increased, he eventually admitted. His confession lacked any sign of remorse or justification, delivered as if stating a simple fact. He neither portrayed himself as a victim nor showed any regret, maintaining a disturbingly calm demeanor as he spoke. The information he provided directly contradicted his earlier statements. He confessed that he hadn't originally intended to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile and ended their relationship for good, he made a choice he never planned to take back. He tricked her by claiming he had found her lost dog. Trusting him and unaware of what was about to happen, she agreed to meet him. He stated that the crime occurred late at night on a deserted highway. He stopped under the false pretense of looking for a missed suitcase that he claimed had fallen from the trunk. When Javier got out of the truck, he struck her with a fatal blow. Afterwards, he drove further into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body, thinking that the harsh environment would eliminate all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators began searching for the burial site using the coordinates given by Andrés. In mid-January 2024, they found human remains in a shallow grave covered with sand. Now, forensic specialists begin the identification process. A few days later, forensic tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Javiera Jimenez. Although the search had ended, the fight for justice was just beginning. His family urged the court to impose the harshest sentence possible on Andrés. After his confession, the case was brought to court. There was no doubt about his guilt. His own words, along with the evidence and the discovery of Javier's body, made that clear. It was now the court's responsibility to decide his punishment. Javier's family insists on the harshest penalty, life in prison without parole. They were convinced that he posed a threat to society. For Javiera's mother, true justice guaranteed Andrés will never have the chance to reoffend. The prosecution presented all relevant evidence in court, with experts confirming that the crime was premeditated. They highlighted the misleading invitation, the choice to take her to a remote area, and the complete absence of any effort to help her, all of which indicated a well-planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claims of accidental harm. Nevertheless, the defense sought a lighter sentence, arguing that their client had confessed, volunteered, and aided in locating the remains, which they claimed to have cooperated with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this argument, which angered Javier's family. They believed it was clear that Andrés's confession was not out of remorse. He only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. He felt no guilt and was merely trying to lessen his sentence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which Gladys participated every session, watching everything unfold. Although she remains composed, her determination was evident in her eyes. Furthermore, in a similar fashion to the disappearance of Javiera Jimenez in August 2022, Andrés is also being investigated for being a member of a violent armed gang that steals copper while it is being transported on FCAB trains. Similar crimes were committed by other members of the gang, and the prosecution was able to establish Andrés Sutter's involvement through photographs, text messages, and statements from other criminals. In both cases, the court set different investigation dates. For the murder, he was sentenced to 90 days, and for the armed robbery and the copper cathode theft, he was sentenced to 60 days. In addition, Andrés remains in custody awaiting trial. The case of Abril Perez. Abril Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, northeastern Mexico, to parents Maria del Securo Sagan and Manuel Perez. She was the second of 3 children. Abril demonstrated exceptional mathematical and entrepreneurial abilities from a young age. She was a dedicated reader and consistently ranked as the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril prioritized achieving financial independence, showcasing remarkable discipline and effective time management skills. Following high school, Abril attended the most prestigious university in New Leon, where she obtained a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her peers described her as intelligent, focused, and ambitious, while also being kind, cheerful, and always willing to assist others. After graduating, Abril secured a position in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. She later transitioned into digital sales, a rapidly expanding field, and discovered her true passion. Abril quickly rose through the ranks and became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was a young, beautiful, and successful woman who was rapidly achieving her life goals. She had built a stellar career, supported her family, and had big plans for the future. However, her personal life was still unfulfilled, which worried her loved ones. Despite this, Abril was confident that she would find true love and live a long, happy life. But she had no idea how her future marriage to the seemingly perfect man would turn out. That man was Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, whom she met in the mid-1990s when her career was taking off. Juan Carlos was just 3 years older than Abril and shared her ambitious drive, which drew her to him. He, in turn, was captivated by her stunning looks, charming personality, kind heart, bright smile, sharp intellect, and remarkable determination. Juan Carlos graduated from a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in economics and trade. He then continued his studies at Harvard University in the United States. After returning to Mexico, he built a successful career in the emerging field of e-commerce. Juan Carlos and Abril met at a conference on the latest financial technologies. Their companies collaborated on several projects, allowing them to cross paths multiple times. Eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had developed feelings for Abril, who was intelligent and beautiful. He obtained her phone number through mutual acquaintances and asked her out on a date. Abril was also attracted to Juan Carlos, finding him to be educated, elegant, and engaging in conversation on a wide range of topics. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by 1998, they decided to get married. At that point, they had both achieved significant success in their careers and were working on developing online stores, a field with great potential. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, inspiring envy and admiration from those around them. However, surface of their perfect family, there were some dark secrets. It wasn't until 2001, 3 years after their wedding, that they had their first child, a daughter named Ana Cecilia. The arrival of their child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband appeared happy, showing their newborn daughter love and admiration. 2 years later, Abril gave birth to a son, named Juan Carlos Jr., after his father. 2 more years passed, and the family had another child, a boy named Julio Andres. Despite having 3 young children, Abril hardly took any time off work and managed to balance parenting with career advancement. She made homemade meals, helped with schoolwork, took the children to sports activities, and aimed to be both a perfect mother and their best friend. Outwardly, the Perez Sanchez family seemed perfect, wealthy, successful, with 3 lovely children, and everything they could want. However, their home life remained a secret, even from their closest relatives, for a long time. In the early years of their relationship, Juan Carlos revealed his true personality to Abril. He had a short temper, was aggressive, and had a tendency to be overly harsh, refusing to compromise and insisting that everything be done his way. Initially, Abril was in love and believed that as time passed, Juan Carlos's rough edges would smooth out. Their shared projects brought them together, and their collaboration led to significant accomplishments, including financial success. However, as the years went by, Juan Carlos's irritability grew, and verbal arguments escalated into physical confrontations. Following the birth of their first daughter, he made a brief effort to control his emotions, but this change was short-lived. A similar attempt was made after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time their 3rd child arrived, Juan Carlos no longer made any effort to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos frequently directed his anger and frustration at Abril and disregarding her emotional well-being. He would insult and belittle her, the mother of his children, and seemed to feel better when she cried. He regularly physically harmed her, doing so in a way that left no visible marks, allowing her to hide the bruises with clothing or makeup. His goal was to maintain his reputation as a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept quiet about the abuse for years, not even telling her sister and mother about the ongoing situation. She earned a good income and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and stable upbringing. However, her husband was wealthy and influential, and she knew he could use the courts to take the children away from her. Knowing Juan Carlos's true nature, Abril couldn't bear the thought of her children being left alone with him, as she considered him a monster capable of anything. when the family's situation reached a boiling point. What was once considered an ideal household now raised suspicions that something was terribly wrong. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed and visibly struggling. She had lost weight, slept poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that were becoming harder to hide and explain. Despite this, Juan Carlos appeared calm and confident in public, pretending that everything was fine. He played the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with Abril politely and affectionately. However, at home, he transformed into a menacing figure. Despite loved ones urging Abril to divorce him, she insisted that everything was fine and that she could handle the problems with her husband on her own. 2014 marked the peak of Juan Carlos' career when he became the head of a major trading company, making him one of the most influential people in his field. Following this promotion, his family relocated to Mexico City, settling into a large house in one of the capital's upscale neighborhoods. Their children began attending an elite private school. Abril had genuinely hoped that this change of environment would improve their relationship. However, contrary to her expectations, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos often persisted in physically and verbally abusing his wife in front of their children. He increasingly accused her of infidelity without any basis for his claims. Whenever she tried to defend herself, he would resort to physical violence, insisting he would find evidence of her supposed disloyalty. Juan Carlos monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and when finding no evidence, he hiring a private detective to follow her and photograph any men who came near her. For 4 years, she tried every possible way to save her marriage. Despite her efforts, her husband's behavior became increasingly unbearable, creating a never-ending nightmare for her. To outsiders, however, their union appeared happy and successful, even enviable, due to her husband's wealth, influence, and seemingly caring nature. In 2018, the Juan Carlos and Abril visited to the Abril's family. During this trip, Juan Carlos treated his wife poorly in front of her parents, who were deeply disturbed by what they saw. This incident marked a turning point for Abril, and she realized that she could no longer continue living this way. She informed her husband that she would file for divorce as soon as they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, Juan Carlos became enraged, grabbed her throat, and squeezed it so tightly that she nearly lost consciousness. Fortunately, her mother, Maria del Soro, entered the room and raised the alarm, preventing a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril prepared for divorce and moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room. However, this did not keep her safe from her husband's abuse. On January 4th, while Abril was still asleep, her husband entered the room holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Abril barely understood what was happening, but she managed to roll off the bed just in time, saving her own life. She began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat away from his father. Together, they fled the house and headed to the hospital, as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed Abril with a severe concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow that required stitches. After Abril and their sons left the house, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to discuss the situation and asked for help in resolving the marital conflict. However, Juan Carlos also posted on social media, accusing his wife of betraying him by being unfaithful and planning to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to claim all their jointly acquired assets. Additionally, Juan Carlos claimed that Abril had stolen all the money from their home safe and had injured him with a knife when he tried to stop her. He posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor as evidence. However, the blood on the floor actually belonged to Abril from her own injury, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Despite the fabrication, Juan Carlos's friends believed his story, actively shared and reposted his account on their social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this supposedly egregious case. Juan Carlos's attempt to kill Abril prompted her to take swift action. From her hospital bed, she filed a police report against him, accusing him of trying to take her life. After her release from the hospital, Abril packed up her 2 young sons and left the family home. Her oldest child, who was attending college in a nearby city, also condemned his father's violent actions. While waiting for justice, she started providing online support and consultations to women who were going through similar experiences. She also planned to open a center that would offer psychological and legal help to victims of domestic violence who had been failed by the justice system. It wasn't until 8.5 months after the incident, in September 2019, that Juan Carlos was finally arrested and charged with inflicting bodily harm and attempting to kill his wife. He was put in jail, where he spent over a month, but he managed to appeal the decision to keep him in detention before his trial. As a result, he was released from jail by November of that year. Judge Federo presided over the case, reclassifying it and ordering a new trial. During the trial, Abril's medical records and photos were not presented as evidence. Her and her son's testimonies were deemed insufficient to detain Juan Carlos because he claimed Abril was manipulating their children against him. The judge released Juan Carlos, concluding his actions didn't pose a direct threat to Abril's life. Abril was shocked and terrified when Juan Carlos was released. She suspected he had bribed his way to freedom, putting her and their children in danger. She wrote to the judge, expressing her fear, but it had no immediate effect. Juan Carlos then initiated a custody battle, forcing Abril to return to Mexico City with their sons to attend court hearings. Abril arrived in Mexico City on November 25 with her children. She had a legitimate fear of her longtime partner and wanted to avoid him. To minimize the risk of an encounter, she planned to leave the city immediately after a court hearing that day. In fact, she had already bought the plane ticket, but Juan Carlos already knew that. After the court session, Abril, her sons, and their lawyer got into a car headed to the airport. However, they never made it to their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist suddenly pulled up next to their car, drew a handgun, and fired 2 shots at Abril, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. The attacker then quickly fled the scene. A shooting occurred, and one of the bullets grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat. Fortunately, none of the children were seriously injured. However, the injured Abril was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors fought to save her life for more than 6 hours. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save her. Abril passed away that evening. The victim's family, including her parents, brother, and sister, immediately flew to the capital and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, whom they believed was behind the brutal act. However, law enforcement had a different perspective, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to determine the motive behind the attack. They also noted that they could not confirm with certainty that the shooting was ordered by Juan Carlos. The tragic case of murder sparked widespread outrage and public debate. Abril's family successfully drew attention to the case, highlighting numerous instances where men had attempted to kill women but escaped punishment. In response to the public outcry, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office launched a new investigation into the suspect, Juan Carlos Sanchez, and also examined the actions of the judges who had previously released him. The judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for their role in the Abril death if his guilt was proven. Juan Carlos took to social media to demand justice for his former wife's murder. However, his daughter, Ana Cecilia, accused him of cruelty and shared photos of her mother's hospitalization after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat, contradicting her father's claims that he would never harm her mother. Despite the media attention surrounding the case, he was initially allowed to remain free during the investigation. However, he was required to check in with the police weekly and was placed under a restraining order. When he failed to appear at the scheduled time, a warrant was issued for his arrest for violating the order. As expected, Juan Carlos could not be found, and it was later discovered that he had used his wealth and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting Juan Carlos as a fugitive accused of a serious crime, and he was subsequently declared wanted worldwide. Meanwhile, efforts were underway to locate criminals in Abril's assassination. Surveillance footage from street cameras revealed that the motorcyclist who committed the crime was not alone. Two vehicles were seen following the car carrying Abril. The motorcyclist appeared to be in constant communication with the occupants of these vehicles, receiving directions and instructions. After several months of investigation, some of the participants were identified, and on March 5, 2020, 2 suspects were arrested in connection with the case. To everyone's surprise, the suspects did not resist arrest and quickly began cooperating with authorities, hoping to receive lighter sentences. It was confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime, and he had paid a significant amount of money to individuals who were directly involved in the crime. The first to be caught were the driver of one of the getaway cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It was discovered that while Juan Carlos was in prison, he had hired 2 experienced criminals to act as his personal bodyguards. One of these bodyguards was released from prison a week before Juan Carlos, and the other was released several days after him. After being released from prison, Juan Carlos reconnected with his accomplices and asked them to recruit trustworthy individuals to help carry out the murder of a person in exchange for a large sum of money. Once all participants were in place, Juan Carlos provided detailed instructions about the intended victim's travel schedule and mode of transportation. However, luring his former wife to Mexico City proved to be a challenge. Juan Carlos used coercion, threatening to take their children unless she attended a court appearance. Despite attending the court date, his ex-wife intended to return to Monterrey on the same day, which Juan Carlos knew about through his sources. 3 more individuals involved in the conspiracy were arrested in late October 2020. Initially, they were taken into custody on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, but further investigation at the police station revealed their potential connection to the high-profile crime. The arrested individuals were part of a major drug trafficking gang led by Balto, who had previously served time with Juan Carlos and offered him protection. In exchange for a significant reward, Balto agreed to help Juan Carlos eliminate his ex-wife. A few weeks later, in November 2020, Maldonado, an individual involved in the case, was also arrested. During his testimony, he confirmed that Juan Carlos had sought out reliable individuals to kill his ex-wife and that he had agreed to assist in exchange for a substantial reward. The investigation confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime. His earlier attack on Abril with a stick was reclassified as an attempted murder. As a result, the court issued an arrest warrant for Juan Carlos on charges of femicide. However, his location remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining suspects involved in the murder of Abril were apprehended. One of them was already serving time for a separate crime. The searches also led to the discovery of the gun used to kill Abril. In total, 9 individuals linked to the same criminal organization were detained, with 7 of them directly involved in the pursuit and shooting of Abril. More than 4 years after the Abril murder, the mastermind behind the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, is still on the run and his location is unknown. Meanwhile, the man who fired the fatal shot has been convicted and sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 accomplices who participated in the car chase and coordinated with the shooter have each been sentenced to 50 years. The case of Kirsten Costas. Kirsten Costas was born on June 23, 1968. Before she was born, her parents, Barrett and Arthur, relocated to a small, quiet town in Oregon, California, with fewer than 20 residents. It was an ideal setting for raising children, peaceful and safe. The family consisted of 2 children, Kirsten and her brother, Peter. This family is very famous, and everyone considers them to be kind, hardworking people. The Costa family is very rich, even richer than other families in their community. The city was mainly populated by successful and prosperous individuals. The girls' parents were highly respected there. They achieved everything through their own efforts. Arthur worked for a large American company called Prim and held a leadership role locally. His wife, Barrett, held a high position at a community center. Together, they earned well and easily met the needs of their family and 2 children, who never lacked anything. By age 15, Kirsten had blossomed into a stunning young woman. She exuded confidence, social, and kind-hearted. As an athlete, she trained frequently and earned the respect of her teachers and peers. She participated in almost all of the school's sports activities, including swimming and dancing. Kirsten was a regular participant and had great potential. Incredibly energetic and outgoing, she easily attracted many friends. She dressed in a bright, unique style, mixing different fashions, and many admirers, who often tried to emulate her style. In the summer of 1984, Kirsten had just finished her sophomore year of high school. During the break, she learned about a support group looking to add new members. Being a bright, charismatic, and athletic student, she was an ideal candidate and already well-liked at school. Joining the group interested her, so she applied to join with a friend, but the selection committee chose only Kirsten. The selection process was rigorous, and Kirsten's victory was hard-won. Her success can be attributed to her dedication and hard work, as she trained extensively, even at home. Kirsten's family was very supportive, paying additional fees to the support group and purchasing her uniform. They helped her in every way possible to ensure her success. In the support group, all the girls came from wealthy families. There was an unspoken competition among them. The wealthier you were, the better. Kirsten had no issues fitting in, thanks to her parents' wealth. Although she seemed to integrate smoothly, there was still some tension among the girls. Being accepted into the support group meant joining not only the women's community at school but also a prestigious club for the most popular, beautiful, and affluent. With all these positive changes, Kirsten expected her final year of high school to be eventful and interesting, anticipating it would be the best time of her life. Kirsten was a 15-year-old girl who dreamed of all the things young people envision. She had a bright personality, charm, influence, wealthy parents, popularity, and strong future prospects. However, Kirsten did not realize the high cost of having all this. On the evening of June 23, 1984, a man named Arthur Hillman heard cries for help from the street while he was at home, not far from the Costas house. When he looked out the window, he saw a girl staggering toward him. She asked for help and was all splashed with blood. Hillman immediately recognized his 15-year-old neighbor, Kirsten, and rushed to the door. The girl was alive but seriously injured. With her last bit of strength, she managed to say that not far from her front door, someone had attacked her and hit her several times. After that, the attacker just disappeared. Kirsten didn't mention his name. Kirsten was bleeding heavily, and within minutes, she lost so much blood that she could barely stand. Hillman rushed onto to help, and Kirsten collapsed into his arms, exhausted. Hillman, who knew how to stop the bleeding, shouted for his wife to call emergency services. While his wife was on the call, he held the girl and provided emergency assistance. He tried to find out what happened and who attacked her, but Kirsten seemed unaware of her surroundings. Her speech was confused, and then she lost consciousness entirely. During the attack, Kirsten's parents were not at home. They were attending their son Peter's baseball game and later went to dinner with his team. Kirsten's parents and Peter returned home just 5 minutes after the attack on Kirsten, and the news was a shock to them. By then, paramedics had already taken her away in an ambulance. Her parents quickly followed the ambulance to the hospital. Although the doctors at the hospital fought to save Kirsten's life, it wasn't possible, and about an hour later she was declared dead. The cause of death was blood loss due to stab wounds. During the autopsy, the coroner found 5 knife wounds on Kirsten's body, 1 on her back and the others on her abdomen. First, the police decided to speak with Kirsten's neighbor, who was the last person to see her alive and tried to help her. The incident was a huge shock for the neighbor and everyone around him. No one anticipated that Kirsten could be attacked so close to her home. Their neighborhood had always been peaceful and secure. People lived there without even locking their doors. An attack like this was unimaginable in their city. Many believed it was an act of Satanism and that the killer was from another city. They couldn't accept the possibility of a local attacker, as it would mean everyone was now at risk. Parents stopped allowing their children to go out for walks or attend parties, while the police increased their patrols in the neighborhood. Hillman did not see the attacker, but while holding the dying Kirsten, he noticed a white Volvo driving away. Just moments earlier, the car had been parked near Kirsten's house, which struck him as odd since he was familiar with all the local residents' cars. And this one was unfamiliar. The police believed that the driver might be the killer. Unfortunately, Arthur could not recall the license plate number, but he tried to give the police the best description he could. As the officers were trying to frame a neighbor who died at the crime scene, a white Volvo car stopped at the same place on the side of the road. The driver, who introduced himself as Alex Arnold, got out of the car. Based on a witness's testimony, the police started to suspect him as the main perpetrator of the crime. It was odd that he appeared at the scene again during the investigation. However, when questioned, he shared an unbelievable story. Alex said that that evening a familiar girl from a neighboring town knocked on his door and asked to make a phone call. It was Kirsten, whose parents were friends with him. Kirsten explained that she had been walking with another girl she knew, but they had an argument, and she decided to go home. She wanted to call her parents, so Alex let her in. However, she couldn't reach them because they were at a match, and there were no mobile phones at the time. Seeing that she was upset, Alex didn't want to leave her in a difficult situation, so he offered to drive her home so she wouldn't have to walk alone late at night. She agreed to walk alone, according to Alex. As soon as Alex and Kirsten drove away from his house, a yellow Ford Pinto started following them. It tailed them persistently, so Alex asked Kirsten if she recognized the owner of the car. Kirsten said she did, but assured him there was no need to worry, but she no providing further details. Alex did not press the matter. When they arrived at her home, Kirsten said goodbye to Alex and got out of the car. At that moment, Alex noticed the yellow Ford Pinto had stopped nearby behind him. As Kirsten reached her house, someone jumped out of the yellow car. Alex observed the scene but couldn't get a clear look at the person's face. He did notice that it was a girl wearing a yellow shirt and red pants. Kirsten saw her approaching and started screaming to be left alone. However, the attacker stabbed Kirsten multiple times in the stomach. After she fell to the ground, the attacker struck her again in the back. Then, the assailant jumped into the yellow car and quickly sped away. Alex explained that he drove off to try to catch up with the car. When he saw a neighbor helping the injured girl, Kirsten, he decided it was more important to pursue the attacker. However, he soon lost sight of the car, so he returned to Kirsten's house to check on her. By then, she had already been taken to the hospital, and the police were speaking with the neighbor. Alex decided to provide a statement to assist the detectives. Initially, police suspected that Alex might have made up the story to mislead the investigation, but his demeanor and statements were convincing. He passed a polygraph test successfully, and there were no traces of blood on him. Consequently, he was removed from the list of suspects after his phone records were checked. Calls to Kirsten's house were indeed made from Alex's home phone number, confirming his story. Several testimonies confirmed the story, including that of Alex's wife, who was also in the house and corroborated her husband's account. After a missed call, Alex took Kirsten home. It would be absurd for him to kill Kirsten near her home, possibly seen by neighbors or her parents, while he could have done it discreetly in his own home. Alex was questioned thoroughly for a description of the suspect. He managed to provide a detailed account of what he saw, allowing the police to get a description to look for the criminal. Initially, the focus was on checking the people around Kirsten to find a girl who matched the suspect's description. This girl could have been the acquaintance with whom Kirsten quarreled that evening. Later, detectives interviewed Kirsten's parents. Kirsten's mother revealed that a week before the attack, while Kirsten was at a cheerleading camp, she received a strange phone call at home. A girl named Kim claimed to be the leader of the school support group and invited Kirsten to an exclusive party at the women's community. The party was for popular teenagers and was set for June 23rd. A car was to pick up Kirsten that evening, and she, along with Kirsten and Tanya, was expected to go to the party without telling anyone. This coincidence suspect the detective because the timing of the murder aligned with the party at the women's club. The police discovered that the invitation was, in fact, a hoax. The detectives managed to contact most of the girls. It turned out that none of them were invited to the party or attended it. Additionally, the leader of the cheerleading squad, Kim, was on vacation in Hawaii at that time. Without her, no party could have taken place, and she couldn't have organized any gatherings. It appears that the invitation was specifically aimed at Kirsten to lure her into a trap. Unfortunately, they couldn't trace the cow, which delayed the investigation. Detectives discovered that the call was made a week before the murder, indicating a carefully planned attack. It became clear to investigators that the leader of the support group who contacted the Costas house knew Kirsten well and had a motive. They probably studied together, or the caller might have been a cheerleader who held a grudge against Kirsten. As a result, detectives began to thoroughly investigate people close to Kirsten. They interviewed dozens of girls and required several of them to take a polygraph test. After speaking with other students, investigators discovered that Kirsten was one of the most popular girls in school. They speculated that someone from outside the popular circle, possibly someone who resented people like Kirsten and sought revenge. They considered it could be a loner girl from among the rebels who struggled to fit into society and had little social interaction. Nancy Kane fit this profile well. She attended the same school as Kirsten, had a unique style, dyed her hair, and wore bold makeup. Other students mentioned that she often drank and smoked in class. Nancy was an outsider, frequently criticized by her peers, including Kirsten. Some time ago, Nancy had been part of the popular crowd but later confessed she grew tired of the superficial friendships and the lifestyle of these wealthy girls. As a result, she distanced herself from others and became isolated. Investigators asked Nancy to come in for questioning, and she agreed to visit the station. According to Nancy, she had an alibi for the evening when they dealt with Kirsten. She was at the cinema at that time. She refused to take a polygraph test, and her relatives strongly opposed it, fearing it might affect her mental well-being. Her parents were concerned that Nancy's nervousness could lead to inaccurate results. Despite these concerns, investigators grew suspicious of Nancy, considering her a potential suspect. Detectives suspected that Nancy's refusal to take the polygraph was because she was involved in the attack and feared exposure. However, there was no solid evidence to charge her as the main suspect. The detectives decided to release her but kept her on the list of suspects and began monitoring her. Rumors circulated among locals that Nancy had threatened Kristen in class the day before her death, and they had a quarrel, but Nancy denied these claims. Local residents began calling Nancy's house that night, threatening her family with violence. Most people believed Nancy was responsible for the crime. She became an outcast, faced bullying at school, and her parents had to transfer her to another school. During this difficult time, Nancy returned to the police station and admitted she had lied. She explained that she wasn't at the cinema during the attack but was actually with her boyfriend. She had lied because she feared her parents would discover the truth about her relationship. Nancy's boyfriend confirmed her alibi, telling investigators that he was with her from the evening until late at night. As a result, detectives had to remove her from the list of suspects. Although the investigation continued, there was no new progress. The police interviewed dozens of young people and offered a reward for any information that could help capture and punish the killer, but it didn't work. Months went by without any results. Then, the county police decided to reach out to an FBI profiler. The agents got involved in the investigation of Kirsten's murder, and their tasks included creating a psychological profile of the killer that the police could compare with the girls close to Kirsten's. The FBI believed the killer was about the same age as Kirsten and assumed they lived nearby, which helped them evade capture due to familiarity with the area. It was thought that the attacker held a strong grudge against Kirsten, motivating the attack. The profiler was confident that the killer felt no remorse, believing Kirsten deserved the punishment. After re-examining all the girls in Kirsten's circle, the police's suspicions turned to Bernadette Prati, a fellow student at the same school as Kirsten. At the time of the crime, Bernadette was 16 years old. Both girls were part of the active community, but Kirsten was considered the most popular at school, while Bernadette envied her and wanted to be part of the privileged group. Several months into the investigation, Kirsten's parents hired a private detective due to dissatisfaction with the slow progress of the investigation. Their initiative quickly yielded results. The hired detective reviewed the data collected by the police and identified Bernadette as the girl who matched the profiler and witness Alex's description. Initially, Bernadette was one of the first people questioned by the police, and she cooperated fully with the investigation, even passing a polygraph test. However, the private detective was not convinced by the test results and suspected Bernadette of involvement in the massacre. Bernadette claimed that on the day of the murder, she worked as a nanny for a family she knew, taking care of their children and staying overnight. However, the police never verified her alibi and simply sent her home. When the private detective investigated further, he discovered that Bernadette was lying. The family she mentioned had not employed her for over a year, and they denied her claims. This deception raised suspicions, suggesting that Bernadette might be hiding something. Bernadette immediately became the prime suspect. In December of the same year, Bernadette was interrogated again at the police station after a private detective provided a new lead. By then, 6 months had passed since the investigation began. As a high school student, Bernadette matched the profile of the killer. She admitted to knowing Kirsten and meeting her on the evening of the incident. However, Bernadette disputed the investigators' claims that she was the one who attacked Kirsten. Notably, Bernadette attended Kirsten's funeral along with her classmates, where witnesses described she crying. But in fact, all this is just deception, aimed at deflecting all suspicion. The police detectives required solid evidence to make an accusation. However, forensic medical examinations at the time were limited, and DNA testing was not yet available. Bernadette remained steadfast in her refusal to surrender to the police's oppressive interrogation, and they were eventually forced to release her. With no concrete evidence and thousands of leads yielding no results, the investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. The sheriff's team had investigated numerous possibilities, interviewing 800 people and inspecting 750 cars in Fort Pinta. Although the interrogations appeared fruitless, they had actually taken a toll on Bernadette. She was visibly shaken and frightened, which eventually led her to open up to parents about her experiences. Bernadette struggled with her emotions for several days before deciding to confide in her devotional parents. Initially, she attempted to confess to her mother in person, but she chose an inopportune moment. One evening, her mother, feeling tired, dismissed her daughter's attempt to talk, unaware of the significance of what Bernadette was trying to share. Bernadette wrote a letter to her parents and handed it to them in the morning, instructing them not to read it until 30 minutes had passed. Assuming it was a game, they waited as instructed. When her mother opened the letter, she found a confession from Bernadette stating that she hated herself and needed help. The parents were shocked. They quickly got in their car and found Bernadette, who had refused to go to school. They took her to the nearest police station, where she confessed to the detectives. Bernadette told them that she had planned and carried out the murder of her friend Kirsten, using a fake meeting as a pretext to lure her into a trap. However, Bernadette claimed that she didn't intend to kill Kirsten, but rather wanted to talk to her and get closer. Bernadette wanted to be as popular as Kirsten and decided to befriend her. Since she wasn't accepted into the women's club support group or featured in the school diary, Bernadette was determined to change her situation. On June 23, 1984, she borrowed her parents' car, telling them she needed to babysit for a couple she knew. This was just an excuse to be out. Bernadette then picked up Kirsten from her house, and Kirsten got into the car, unaware of what was happening. Bernadette lied, telling Kirsten they were going to the same place because she was also now part of the popular cheerleading squad. Instead, Bernadette drove to a nearby town and pulled into a church parking lot, stopping in a shaded area. Kirsten confused, she tried to understand what was going on and why they were going in a different direction. Bernadette confessed that there was no party. She offered Kirsten a cigarette, but Kirsten declined. Kirsten became angry, and a fight broke out between the two girls. According to Bernadette, Kirsten demanded to be taken home. Kirsten was furious about the situation and found Bernadette's attempt to befriend her through kidnapping to be bizarre. The fake party plan seemed completely inappropriate and inexplicable to Kirsten. She became frustrated with herself and decided the fake party plan seemed completely inappropriate and inexplicable to Kirsten. She became frustrated with herself and decided to leave, intending to find her own way home. This is when she met Alex, who helped her out and gave her a ride in his car. Unbeknownst to Kirsten, Bernadette was following them, claiming she wanted to make sure Kirsten got home safely. However, according to Bernadette's confession, her true motive for following Kirsten was fear that Kirsten would expose her unusual attempt at friendship to their school, leading to ridicule and social exclusion. Being laughed at was Bernadette's worst nightmare, as she desperately wanted to fit in with the popular girls, including Kirsten. Bernadette was extremely scared, which led her to make a poor decision in an attempt to solve her problem with Kirsten. According to Bernadette's own words, it was clear that she was desperate to gain Kirsten's approval and support. She created a fake check as an excuse to spend time with Kirsten, bringing along a truck she believed would bring their group closer together. Bernadette's plan was to show Kirsten how well she could fit into their circle. She dreams of achieving high results in class and becoming famous, but this thing's ultimately backfired, making the situation worse. Bernadette was very angry, no matter what she did. She became much worse over time. Her resentment and envy grew over the years and eventually led to a tragic outcome. After the murder, Bernadette went home, hid the knife in the yard, and took a walk with her mother. The next day, they washed the knife and put it back in the kitchen. Later, Bernadette disposed of her shirt and pants in a trash can near the school. Many witnesses supported the FBI profiler's statement. Bernadette indeed held a strong grudge against Kirsten and had a motive. Numerous students noticed that Kirsten often criticized and even ridiculed Bernadette. Although they appeared friendly when interacting, Kirsten occasionally called her a copycat, which deeply offended Bernadette. The Bernadette family was much poorer than Kirsten's family. Bernadette's parents were retired and couldn't afford many things, worsening their situation. Bernadette claimed she initially had no harmful intentions, she only wanted to communicate and become friends with Kirsten. She needed to lure Kirsten out of the house for any reason, just to talk and establish a friendship. However, when the situation got out of control, Bernadette panicked and ended up stabbing her classmate, Kirsten. She insisted it wasn't premeditated murder but rather the result of unfortunate circumstances. However, there was at least one inconsistency in this story. How did a large knife, more than 40 centimeters long, end up in Bernadette's hands by chance? Such a weapon wouldn't accidentally end up with a girl, suggesting that Bernadette didn't initially plan to kill Kirsten but had considered it and prepared for it. The case went to court in March 1985, with the accusation arguing that the attack was carefully planned. The story about a party at a women's club was an attempt to lure Kirsten away from her house. The large butcher's knife that accidentally ended up in Bernadette's car suggested intentional actions. It was clear that Bernadette had been planning the murder for a long time. Bernadette's lawyer argued that her actions were unintentional. Bernadette, in response to the accusations, claimed she used the knife to peel fruit in her car, which she loved and frequently drove. However, this explanation seemed suspicious since the knife was large and typically used for cutting meat, making it impractical for fruit peeling. Nevertheless, the prosecution couldn't firmly establish that the massacre was premeditated. The jury found Bernadette guilty of manslaughter. Since she was a minor at the time of the crime, she was sentenced to 9 years in a juvenile detention facility. Her lawyer mentioned that in California, juveniles convicted of murder typically serve 1 to 6 years. Bernadette served 7 years of her sentence before being paroled in 1992, when she was 23 years old. The Kirsten family was understandably outraged by the lenient punishment given for the brutal attack on their daughter. At the time, Bernadette had already finished high school, passed her exams, and received a diploma. She had a whole life ahead of her that she could no longer pursue after the murder. After her release, Bernadette changed her name and moved to another state to escape criticism. She got married and had 2 children. Today, Bernadette is over 50 and has lived a full life, unlike her classmate, Kirsten. The Kirsten family relocated to Hawaii and could never challenge the verdict to seek a harsher punishment for Bernadette. They still believe their daughter's killer faced too light a sentence. The case of Mackenzie Lueck. Mackenzie Lueck was born on March 8, 1996. Her father, Gregory Lueck, worked in healthcare logistics and administration, while her mother, Diana, was a homemaker. She grew up in El Segundo, Los Angeles County, California, with an older brother and 2 younger brothers. Mackenzie attended El Segundo High School, where she was on the swim team and played water polo. She was a dedicated student with a passion for art, music, and animals. After graduating, she enrolled at the University of Utah, majoring in kinesiology and nursing. She was also involved in the Alpha Kappa Omega sorority. While at the University of Utah, she expressed her support for women's rights and later left one of the major political parties to join a third conservative party. Mackenzie works at a biotesting company in Salt Lake City. She recalls the days when she biked to the Pacific Ocean, wearing a bikini and sunbathing in the high desert. She plans to pursue a career in the healthcare field, is considering nursing or medical school, and is scheduled to graduate in May 2020. The Lueck family was typical, but everything changed on June 17, 2019, when Mackenzie returned to Salt Lake City after her grandmother's funeral. Early on the morning of June 17, around 2 a.m., Mackenzie texted her mother after landing at Salt Lake City International Airport from California. landed and love you, Mom. However, when Diana tried to contact Mackenzie again, she realized that her daughter's phone was turned off. Gregory also called Mackenzie, but it went straight to voicemail, leaving the Lewick family worried about her well-being. On June 20th, Mackenzie's parents discovered that her friends had not heard from her either. They reported Mackenzie missing to the Salt Lake City Police Department. Over the next 2 weeks, Mackenzie's family attempted to track her down from California. Members of MAC Nzi's Alpha Kappa Omega sorority began searching for her in Utah. Together, they created a Find Mackenzie Lewick Facebook page to bring national media attention to the matter. Investigators are working to figure out what happened. They have video evidence showing Mackenzie at the airport. She was then taken by a Lyft driver to Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, about 13 miles from the airport. Investigators have also verified Mackenzie's cell phone information, confirming that she was at the park. Detectives have discovered that Mackenzie had been exchanging text messages with a stranger named Iola Ajayi. Mackenzie is believed to have met Iola through a dating website and agreed to meet. The last text message Mackenzie sent to Iola was at 2:58 a.m. Cell phone data showed that both Mackenzie and Iola were at Hatch Park, and at 2:59 a.m., Mackenzie's phone stopped transmitting location data, indicating that her phone was turned off. Detectives then tracked Iola's cell phone signal, leading them from the park to his home at 547 North 1000 West in the Fair Park neighborhood. Investigators determined that Iola's cell phone was at his home at 3:07 a.m., just 7 to 8 minutes after he picked up Mackenzie from the park. Based on this evidence, detectives decided to execute a search warrant at Iola's home because he was considered a prime suspect in Mackenzie's disappearance. During the search of Iola's residence, a neighbor reported a terrible odor coming from a gasoline-fueled campfire in Iola's backyard, next to a garage, on June 17th and 18th. Investigators impounded Iola's vehicle when they detected a strong odor of gasoline and found a red gasoline can in the trunk. They determined that Iola had purchased a similar can of gasoline at a local store on the morning of Mackenzie's disappearance, at 9 a.m. After Iola was arrested, investigators analyzed his cell phone records and located the phone in Logan Canyon, where Iola admitted to his attorney that he had buried Mackenzie's body on June 25th, between 2:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation of the area and discovered a disturbed dirt in a wooded area near a major road. There, they found the charred remains of a person. An autopsy conducted on July 3rd identified the body as that of Mackenzie Lewick. She had been bound with rope behind her back. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the left side of the skull and ruled her death a homicide. On October 7, 2020, Iola was convicted of first-degree murder and third-degree indignity in connection with Mackenzie's death. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and an additional 5 years in prison for the indignity to Mackenzie's body. Iola was also charged with kidnapping another woman he met on a dating app in March 2018. The victim turned herself in after Iola was arrested for Mackenzie's murder. On October 7, 2020, Iola pleaded guilty to second-degree sexual abuse in connection with that case and was later sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. Iola was charged with 19 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. These charges arose in August 2019, after police discovered multiple images of child pornography on his computer during the investigation into Mackenzie's death. The images, allegedly depicting children between the ages of 4 and 8, were discovered on July 2nd. Iola pleaded not guilty on October 1, 2020, and the charges related to the obscene act were later dismissed. The tragic loss of Mackenzie Lewick has shocked her loved ones and the nation. Her bright smile, zest for life, and dream of making a difference were taken from her in a senseless way. Nevertheless, Mackenzie's loved ones have come together to remember and honor her life. Her sorority friends remember her as a shining light, always ready to help and encourage. Through her art, music, and love for animals, Mackenzie's spirit lives on. Her story serves as a reminder to be vigilant and cautious, especially when engaging in online dating services. But more importantly, it reminds us of the value of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. Rest in peace, Mackenzie Lueck. The case of Irene Cortez. Irene Cortez, née Lucas, was born in 1980 in Granada, Spain. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a successful small business, which her mother, Maria Lucas, expanded and continued to operate after her father's early passing. Thanks to her mother's efforts and the help of her uncle, Pedro Lucas, Irene wanted for nothing. As the eldest of the three siblings, she was a beautiful, outgoing girl who loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and became pregnant at 17, giving birth to her first child. 2 years later, she had her second child. Despite becoming a mother at a young age, Irene's family supported her in pursuing a good education. In the early 2000s, Irene relocated to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and their 2 children. There, she launched an entertainment venue that quickly gained popularity and became profitable. Initially, it was a small disco bar, but it eventually evolved into a full-fledged nightclub in Malaga. They welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. However, tragedy struck when Irene's husband was arrested at the age of 25 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Sadly, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. With her husband gone, Irene was left alone to care for their children. Drawing strength from her own mother, who had single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. Despite the challenges, she successfully managed her business, earning a good income, and had ambitious plans for the future. Ferd Saras, born in 1976 in Baronia, Colombia, grew up in a large, impoverished family as the youngest of his siblings. After his parents separated in the early 1990s, he stayed with his mother while his older siblings became independent. In 2001, at the age of 25, Ferd and his elderly mother moved to Spain in search of a better life, settling in Malaga, where he took on any job to support them. In 2005, Ferd began working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. She quickly noticed his hard work and reliability and was also drawn to him. Ferd, in turn, did his best to impress her. At the time, Irene's husband was in prison, and she intended to file for divorce once he was released, but he died unexpectedly before she could do so. Irene and Ferd's employer-employee relationship soon evolved into romance. Despite Irene having 3 children from previous relationships, and Ferd's humble background as a waiter who received a salary from her, their relationship blossomed. Within months of starting their relationship, they made the decision to cohabit. They moved into Irene's spacious apartment, and shortly after, Irene became pregnant with Ferd's child. They went on to have 2 children together. Although it is unclear whether they formally got married, Irene retained her first husband's surname, whereas the children she had with Ferd took on the Saras surname. Irene's past repeated itself in 2009 when her husband Ferd was arrested for distributing illegal substances and imprisoned. Just like her first husband, Ferd's imprisonment left Irene alone to care for their 5 children. Although he was sentenced to 3 years, Ferd served only 1.5 years due to good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. During Ferd's imprisonment, Irene found comfort in the arms of another man and lived with him for 1.5 years. However, upon his release, Ferd discovered Irene's infidelity and was understandably furious. He threatened Irene and her lover, even coming close to attacking the man, but narrowly avoided further legal trouble. Ultimately, the situation was resolved peacefully. Ferd chose to forgive Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed their life together, as if the imprisonment and infidelity had never occurred. Irene's family members had always harbored doubts about Ferd. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting that Ferd was only interested in Irene's wealth. Additionally, Irene's older children from her previous marriage never accepted Ferd, whereas the youngest, whom Ferd had raised since the age of 2, saw him as a father figure. In early 2011, Irene's husband Ferd told her he needed to visit his homeland of Colombia because his father was severely ill. Ferd's estranged father had been diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the situation. Irene, who had always wanted to visit Colombia, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Ferd's father, whom she had never met, and experience the famous Barranquilla Carnival, which usually takes place in late February. Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation in years due to her dedication to work and raising their 5 children, saw this trip as a much-needed break. They planned a 10-day trip, and Irene's mother and younger sister agreed to take care of her children during that time. Despite her mother Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene ignored her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Although Irene had €3,000 in cash saved at home, she discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared on the eve of their trip, almost canceling their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends, booked their flight tickets, and reserved a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that would tragically be her last. On February 27, 2011, Irene and her partner Ferd arrived in Colombia after an uneventful flight and checked into their hotel. Irene called her mother to reassure her that they had arrived safely. However, 2 days later, Ferd informed Irene's 14-year-old son that his mother had died. At first, Ferd claimed that Irene had died in an accident, but it soon emerged that she had been murdered during a robbery at a bar in the Baronia neighborhood. The case quickly gained widespread media attention in Colombia, with reports suggesting that Irene, a Spanish tourist, had been killed by robbers who had fled the scene, prompting a massive police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed suspicious. The attackers did not appear to have stolen anything, instead shooting Irene in the heart before fleeing in haste. Despite witnessing the shooting, Ferd appeared calm during an interview with journalists, which did not match the image of a grieving widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed Irene's murder and announced that her remains would be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd remain unclear, and authorities are currently pursuing the attackers responsible for the senseless crime. Surveillance footage provided crucial clues in the mysterious death of Irene Cortez. The footage, captured by cameras at the scene of the crime, shed light on the events of March 1st. That evening, Irene and her partner Ferd Garris had made plans to meet Ferd's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 friends spent the day at the carnival, took a stroll around town, and then headed to a local bar for dinner and entertainment, following Farid's suggestion. By 1 a.m., Irene, Ferd, and his relatives were the only customers remaining at the bar. At around 2 a.m., 2 young men, who looked out of place, sat down away from the group. They didn't order anything and seemed uncomfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager due to their suspicious behavior. Additionally, their youthful appearance prompted the manager to check if they were of legal age to be in the bar. When asked for their IDs, the young men refused to comply, and when told to leave, one of them pulled out a gun, aiming it at the manager. The other man produced a knife, but quickly moved out of the camera's view. The gunman pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing that they were being robbed and demanding that they hand over their mobile phones and cash. The man with the knife reappeared, presumably to collect the valuables, while the gunman continued to threaten the group. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Faced with the gunman, Irene was ordered to stand up so that Ferd could be searched. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant suddenly lunged at her with the hand holding the gun. A shot was fired, striking Irene directly in the chest, causing her to collapse to the floor. The assailants then fled the scene without taking any valuables. Ferd and his brother chased after the robbers, while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called the emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits escaped. The men returned to the bar, trying to aid Irene, but it was too late. The emergency responders arrived quickly, but Irene died on the way to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. A massive manhunt was launched to catch the perpetrators, followed by their arrest and trial for the robbery and murder that took Irene Cortez's life. With the city full of tourists for the carnival, law enforcement utilized all available resources to ensure their safety. The next day, the authorities apprehended the primary suspect, Brian Dario, who was identified as the gunman. Shortly after, Dario implicated his partner in crime, Juan Carlos. The 18-year-old Juan Carlos subsequently surrendered to the police, hoping to receive a more lenient sentence. During the interrogation, Dario claimed that financial difficulties, debts, and a sick child in need of expensive medical treatment drove him to commit the crime, a claim later supported by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring when he tried to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos claimed he was an unknowing participant in the crime, saying that Brian had not shared his plans with him. According to Juan Carlos, Brian only asked him to provide backup in a job where he would carry a small knife purely for intimidation purposes, not to cause harm. He also claimed that once he realized Brian's true intentions, he left the scene. However, the surveillance footage told a different story, clearly showing Juan Carlos returning to Brian after he initially left. With both Juan Carlos and Brian in police custody and having confessed to the crime, it seemed like the case was closed, and they would soon be facing prison sentences. Dario was sentenced to 23 years in prison for robbery and homicide, while Carlos got 17 years. However, new evidence pointed to Ferd's involvement, including his wife's family accusing him of masterminding her murder. A private investigator found that Ferd had access to missing €3,000, which may have been used to pay Dario. Ferd also lied about his father's cancer to justify a trip to Colombia, and suspiciously suggested visiting the crime scene, staying late into the night. The detective conducted a thorough examination of the camera recordings, interpreting the footage and drawing his own conclusions. He observed that the criminal's behavior was unusual. Juan appeared frightened and seemed uncertain about what was happening, while Brian approached Ferd and lifted him up, but didn't directly threaten him with a gun. It seemed like he were acquainted and were acting in unison. Next, Ferd moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table, in a peculiar manner. When she reached into her bag to retrieve her wallet, the gunman looked at Ferd as if waiting for a signal. It's unclear whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband moved out of camera view shortly after the shot. The man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately allowed him to escape. However, this assertion can be disputed, as Brian was armed with a gun, and Ferd could reasonably have feared for his life. After the chosen one was declared dead, the man's behavior raised questions. Despite the tragedy, he appeared composed, giving interviews to reporters and discussing details of the event without showing visible signs of distress or grief. Another puzzling aspect was his decision to inform Irene's 14-year-old son of his mother's death, rather than contacting her mother, uncle, or other adult relatives. According to Maria Lucas, this choice was deliberate, intended to inflict pain on the teenager, as punishment for not respecting the stepfather's authority. Irene's uncle, Pedro Lucas, was the first to speak out in the press, sharing his suspicions and the investigation's findings. He believed that Ferd had planned the trip in advance, luring Irene into a trap. The stolen money was allegedly used to hire a killer, and Ferd intended to assume guardianship over the children and take control of his late wife's business. Ferd's mother came to her son's defense, insisting that he loved Irene and her children deeply and would never harm them. However, she inadvertently revealed a telling detail, mentioning that Irene's infidelity had offended Ferd's pride, suggesting a potential motive for the crime. A new development emerged concerning Garris leaving Spain, allegedly using fake documents to do so. This was noteworthy because he was not allowed to leave the country at that time, having recently been released from prison on parole. Garris denied this information, claiming he left Spain legally and that Irene acted as his guarantor. Irene's body was returned to her native Spain 12 days after the tragedy, and a closed casket funeral was held due to the decomposition of her remains. Hundreds attended the funeral, including family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez but wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person absent from the farewell ceremony was Ferd, who feared returning from Colombia due to concerns about potential retribution. Ferd claimed that his late wife's relatives had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. Before flying back to Spain, he intended to request protection from the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Garris decided not to take the risk. In response, Ferd filed a court complaint against his deceased wife's relatives, alleging they prevented him from returning home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they wanted him to return to Spain to face trial. New court proceedings focused on fresh claims against Ferd, questioning Dario and Carlos in a Colombian prison about their link to Garris and prior planning. Brian denied this, saying the murder was an unplanned result of a botched robbery, and he never met Ferd before. Dario admitted that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances on the evening in question, which explained his poor recollection of the event's chronology. Carlos, on the other hand, maintained that his friend had not involved him in his plans, and that everything that happened in the bar had been as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Juan seemed to be telling the truth, but Brian's words about who made the fatal shot raised some doubts. It was puzzling that, despite not committing the robbery, Brian ended up in prison, yet his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people who learned about his motive had helped him. However, the Lucas family lawyers attempted to prove that the €3,000 stolen from Irene, which Ferd had paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment, but this version was never proven. Garris decided to return to Spain only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Garris claimed to have brought investigation materials that proved his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months after the incident, Ferd granted a major interview in which he shared a devastating update. He had lost almost everything that mattered. He was unemployed, his passport had been revoked, and as a result, he was stuck in the country with no way to leave. To make matters worse, his friends had abandoned him, and his late wife's mother and uncle had forbidden him from seeing his own children. Ferd repeatedly clashed with Maria and Pedro Lucas in court, alleging that they had threatened him. Meanwhile, they tried to prove that he was involved in Irene's murder. Despite their efforts, neither party could provide sufficient evidence to support their claims. In the end, the grandmother and uncle retained custody of the children, and Ferd was unable to inherit any of his late wife's assets. The case of Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Ray Greenberg was born in New York in June 1993 to Santa and George Greenberg. As their only child, she grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. During her high school years, Ellen was a dedicated team player and demonstrated great athletic potential. She was characterized as energetic, restless, and outgoing, yet she also excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen attended Pennsylvania State University, where she earned a degree in public relations. However, she soon realized this wasn't the career path she wanted to pursue. In parallel with her job, she enrolled in a pedagogical institute's correspondence department, and a few years later, successfully defended her diploma. Ellen then relocated to Philadelphia, where she landed a job as a junior high school teacher. Ellen's life was thriving, according to her relatives. She was bursting with enthusiasm, making ambitious plans for the future, and absolutely loved her work with students. It was during this period that she met Samuel, also known as Sam Greenberg, a young man from a wealthy and prominent family in the city. Sam's parents ran a large business, and his uncle was renowned as one of the top lawyers in the state. The two met in 2009 at a party through mutual friends and instantly clicked. Their friendly banter soon turned into a whirlwind romance, and they decided to move in together shortly after. As the clock struck 2011, on New Year's Eve, Sam proposed to Ellen, and the couple began making preparations for their spring wedding that same year. The news was met with joy from both families, and it seemed that nothing could come between the happy couple. Ellen threw herself into the delightful tasks associated with wedding planning, including drawing up guest lists, sending out invitations, choosing a venue and decorations, trying on wedding dresses, and organizing their honeymoon. Notably, Ellen took the reins on these preparations, with the groom seemingly uninvolved, although their loved ones didn't think much of it at the time. On January 26, 2011, a severe snowstorm hit the city. Ellen went to school as usual, but classes were canceled around noon due to strong winds and a blizzard, and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she shared with her fiancé, Sam. Later that day, the couple allegedly had a disagreement, which Sam initially confirmed but later denied. At around 5 p.m., Sam went to the gym in their apartment complex. When he returned, he found the apartment door locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly, then called out to Ellen by name, drawing the attention of their neighbors. He also tried calling her phone and sending messages, but there was no response to his knocking, calling, and yelling. However, it was clear that Ellen's phone was still inside the apartment. Sam went to the first floor of the building to ask the security guard for help. He explained the situation and asked if it was possible to open the front door, but the guard said he didn't have the authority to do so and couldn't leave his post. Sam returned to his floor, determined to take action. He used his shoulder to force open the door, managing to break the latch on the first try. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific sight. Ellen was sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet door, her body brutally slashed with a knife and her clothes covered in blood. Sam immediately called emergency services, describing the scene. When asked to check Ellen's pulse, Sam hesitated, repeatedly asking if it was really necessary. Then there was a pause before he suddenly announced that there was a knife stuck in Ellen's chest, which he claimed he hadn't noticed until that moment. He concluded that Ellen was clearly already dead. The police officers who responded to the call were taken aback, having never encountered a scene like this in their extensive careers. They found the door locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had later dislodged with his shoulder. There was no evidence of forced entry or intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment, and all valuables and cash remained untouched. The officers noted that nothing appeared to have been searched or disturbed. However, the most striking aspect emerged when the deceased girl's body was examined. There were no signs of struggle or attempts at self-defense, suggesting that the event occurred suddenly and the victim had no time to react. The body bore approximately 24 stab wounds of varying